Good day, lovely viewers. Welcome to Dark Harry. We have an exciting story lined up for you today. What if Morticia Addams met Bellatrix Lestrange and showed her what true darkness looks like? Your engagement means the world to us. Like, comment, and subscribe to help us grow and bring you more amazing content. Without wasting any time, let's start. Chapter 1. When worlds collide. The Addams family mansion creaked and groaned as it always did on particularly stormy nights, almost as if it were singing along with the thunder. Grandmama Addams scurried through the hallways, her arms loaded with strange ingredients, crushed bat wings, the tears of a mandrake, and a bubbling vial of something that occasionally let out a small scream. "Morticia, darling," she called out excitedly. "The alignment is perfect tonight. Perfect for my new experiment." Morticia glanced up from her knitting, a tiny black sweater with 3 armholes for Wednesday's newest pet. "How wonderful, Mother. Do be careful not to wake the vultures in the attic this time." Gomez, who had been standing on his head in the corner practicing his yoga, flipped upright with remarkable agility. "What's this about an experiment? Something dangerous? Potentially catastrophic?" His eyes lit up with childlike glee. "One can only hope," Morticia responded with a serene smile. Down in Grandmama's laboratory, a chaotic space in the deepest sub-basement of the house, the elderly witch cackled as she threw ingredients into a cauldron that was much too large for the small fire beneath it. The impossible physics of the scene wouldn't have looked out of place in a fever dream. Just a pinch of powdered moonstone, a lock of hair from someone who's died twice, and... She dropped in what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary rubber duck that immediately melted with a horrifying scream. Perfect. The potion began to swirl, colors shifting rapidly from deep purple to an electric blue to a black so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. The air crackled with strange energy that made the jars of preserved specimens on the shelves rattle and dance. "Ooh, it's working even better than I hoped." Grandmama clapped her hands together excitedly just as the cauldron began to emit a high-pitched whine. Upstairs, the entire family paused whatever macabre activities they were engaged in. Wednesday looked up from where she was showing Pugsley how to properly tie a hangman's noose. "Grandmama's really outdoing herself tonight," she said flatly. Lurch, who had been dusting the stuffed grizzly bear in the corner, let out a low mrrr of agreement. The chandelier above them began to swing, softly at first, then with increasing vigor as the entire house started to vibrate. Portraits on the wall chattered their teeth, and Thing, the disembodied hand, scurried across the floor to hide in a cookie jar. "Tish!" Gomez exclaimed, looking utterly delighted. "I believe we're about to have an event." In the basement, Grandmama's excitement turned to concern as her cauldron began to spin, levitating off the floor. "Well, this is unexpected," she muttered, backing away. "Fascinating, but unexpected." The magical concoction imploded with a sound like reality itself being torn, which, in fact, it was. A swirling vortex of darkness formed above the cauldron, expanding rapidly until it was the size of a door. And through that door stumbled a wild-haired woman in tattered black robes, her eyes wide and manic, a thin wooden stick clutched in her hand. Bellatrix Lestrange had been running for days. The Aurors were closing in, and she'd felt the pull of powerful magic, dangerous magic, and followed it instinctively, hoping it might be her Dark Lord calling. Instead, she'd found, whatever this portal was. She stumbled, nearly falling face-first onto the stone floor of Grandmama's laboratory. Catching herself, she spun around, wand at the ready, and found herself face to face with what appeared to be an ancient Muggle woman staring at her with unabashed curiosity. "Well, hello there," Grandmama said cheerfully. "You're not a demonic entity from the 13th Circle, are you? I specifically asked for one of those." Bellatrix raised her wand higher. "Who are you? Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, her eyes darting around the strange laboratory filled with ingredients that even she, with her extensive knowledge of dark magic, couldn't identify. "I'm Grandmama Addams, and you're in my laboratory." The old woman peered at Bellatrix more closely. My, you look terrible. Running from something, are you? The police? An angry mob? A vengeful spirit? I don't answer to muggles, Bellatrix spat, though something about the old woman's casual attitude toward her sudden appearance was throwing her off balance. Muggle? Is that some sort of mushroom? Grandmama chuckled. I've been called many things in my 300 years, but never a fungus. Before Bellatrix could respond, the door to the laboratory burst open, and a tall, mustached man bounded in, followed by a woman so pale she seemed to glow in the dimness of the basement. Mother! I felt the disturbance upstairs. Have you summoned something magnificent? Gomez's eyes landed on Bellatrix, and his face lit up. A visitor. How marvelous. Morticia glided into the room, her movements so smooth she might have been floating. Mother, you know we prefer to be notified before you bring guests from other dimensions. I would have prepared the special hemlock tea. Bellatrix kept her wand trained on them, her knuckles white with tension. These people weren't acting the way muggles should when confronted with a witch. Where was the fear? The confusion? The denial? I am Bellatrix Lestrange, the Dark Lord's most faithful servant, she declared, deciding intimidation was her best option. And you will tell me exactly where I am and how I got here, or I'll show you pain you've never imagined. Instead of cowering, Gomez burst into delighted laughter. Magnificent introduction. Such presence. Reminds me of my cousin Vlad, he also enjoyed a good threatening monologue. Morticia approached Bellatrix without a trace of fear, moving with grace that made the witch tighten her grip on her wand. Miss Lestrange, welcome to the Addams family home. I'm Morticia Addams, this is my husband Gomez, and you've met my mother. Would you care for something to drink after your journey? You look positively desiccated. Bellatrix's patience snapped. With a snarl, she flicked her wand. Crucio. The red light of the unforgivable curse shot directly at Morticia's heart. Gomez screamed, "Tish," and lunged forward, but he was too late. The curse struck Morticia square in the chest. And she smiled. Oh my, Morticia said, a look of pleasant surprise crossing her face. That tingles quite delightfully. Is it a massage spell? Gomez, you must try this. Bellatrix stared in shocked disbelief. The Cruciatus curse, her specialty, her pride, and this strange woman was acting like it was a gentle back rub? What are you? She hissed, backing away slightly. Gomez bounced over to his wife, concern and curiosity mingling on his expressive face. Are you all right, Tish? Shall I duel this mysterious witch to defend your honor? That won't be necessary, mon cher, Morticia said, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her dress. Our guest is simply saying hello in her own way. Before anyone could respond further, two children appeared in the doorway, a girl with braided dark hair and a solemn expression, and a pudgy boy with a mischievous grin. Mother, Wednesday said flatly, Pugsley and I felt the dimensional rift from upstairs. Has something interesting finally happened? Yeah. Pugsley added enthusiastically. Did we get invaded by soul-eating shadow monsters? I've been hoping for those. Bellatrix felt herself losing control of the situation, if she'd ever had control to begin with. These people were clearly not normal muggles. Perhaps they were some kind of magical beings she hadn't encountered before. But why hadn't the Dark Lord mentioned such potential allies? Children, this is Miss Lestrange, Morticia introduced smoothly. She's visiting from another dimension and has been showing us a fascinating pain curse. Wednesday's eyes lit up with interest, the most emotion Bellatrix had seen on the girl's face. A pain curse? Real magic? Can you teach me? Pugsley jumped up and down. Me first. Use it on me first. Children, Morticia gently admonished, our guest has only just arrived. Let's not overwhelm her. She turned back to Bellatrix. You must be exhausted. Lurch will show you to our guest room, and we can discuss your situation over dinner. As if summoned by her words, an enormous, grave-faced butler appeared behind the children, letting out a deep, rumbling groan. "You rang?" His voice seemed to come from somewhere beneath the earth. "Lurch, please show Miss Lestrange to the East Wing guest room, the one with the Iron Maiden beside the bed. I think she'll find it comfortable." Bellatrix raised her wand again, determined not to be ushered away like some common visitor. "I am not going anywhere until you tell me what kind of magic protects you from my curse." Instead of answering, Morticia simply regarded her with gentle amusement, as one might look at a child throwing a tantrum. "All in good time. Dinner will be served in 1 hour. I do hope you like henbane soup, it's Wednesday's favorite." The dismissal in Morticia's tone was so casual, so complete, that Bellatrix found herself momentarily speechless. No one dismissed Bellatrix Lestrange. No one treated her like an unruly schoolgirl. She was feared, respected, dreaded throughout the wizarding world. Yet something in Morticia's serene confidence made Bellatrix hesitate to attack again. There was power here, different from what she knew, but power nonetheless. And Bellatrix had always been drawn to power. "Fine," she snapped, lowering her wand slightly. "I'll stay for now. But only because I choose to." "Of course," Morticia agreed smoothly. "Free will is such a precious thing, don't you think? Though Grandfather Addams always said it was vastly overrated compared to a good curse." Lurch let out another rumbling groan and gestured toward the door. Bellatrix, still clutching her wand, followed the enormous butler, keeping a wary eye on the strange family behind her. As she left, she heard the little girl ask, "Mother, can I dissect her wand to see how it works?" "Now, Wednesday," Morticia replied, "it's not polite to dissect a guest's possessions until they've been here at least 3 days." Bellatrix shuddered despite herself. The halls of the Addams mansion were unlike any place Bellatrix had ever seen, even the ancient black family home with all its dark artifacts couldn't compare. Mounted on the walls were weapons from every era, many still stained with what looked disturbingly like blood. Exotic stuffed animals in positions of attack lined the corridors. Paintings that seemed to follow her with their eyes, though not in the magical way she was accustomed to, gazed down with malevolent expressions. "Your room," Lurch announced in his cavernous voice, opening a heavy door that creaked like a dying man's last breath. The guest room was spacious, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed draped in black velvet. Beside it, as promised, stood an authentic Iron Maiden, its spikes gleaming in the dim light from a chandelier made of what appeared to be human bones. Cobwebs decorated the corners, and the wallpaper depicted scenes of medieval torture in painstaking detail. "Homey," Bellatrix commented dryly, though in truth, it wasn't entirely unlike her own tastes. Lurch merely groaned in response and backed out of the room, closing the door behind him with a sound like a coffin lid slamming shut. Alone at last, Bellatrix began to pace, her mind racing. She needed to figure out where she was, how she got here, and most importantly, how to get back. The Dark Lord would be expecting her to report back. She couldn't afford to be trapped in, whatever this place was. She tried operating, concentrating hard on Malfoy Manor, but nothing happened. Something about this place was interfering with her magic, not blocking it entirely, as her curse had still worked, even if it hadn't had the desired effect, but altering it somehow. A soft skittering sound made her whirl around, wand at the ready. There, crawling across the floor, was a disembodied hand. Bellatrix stared in disbelief as the hand stopped, seemed to notice her, and then gave her a friendly wave. "What in Merlin's name?" she whispered. The thing, though she didn't know its name yet, made a gesture that somehow conveyed it was offering to take her coat. Bellatrix responded with a slashing hex that should have cut the creature in half. Instead, Thing nimbly dodged, wagging one finger at her in what seemed like admonishment before scurrying out under the door. This place was madness. These people were madness. And yet, there was something about their casual acceptance of the macabre that resonated with a deep part of Bellatrix's soul. These weren't simpering, frightened muggles hiding from the dark, they embraced it, lived in it, celebrated it. But in a way that made no sense to her. Where was the cruelty? The domination? The fear? A chiming bell echoed through the house, followed by Lurch's voice calling, "Dinner is served." Bellatrix squared her shoulders. Dinner with these strange people might provide answers. And if not, well, she hadn't tortured anyone properly in days. Perhaps this family would prove more susceptible to pain on a second attempt. The dining room was a grand affair, with a table long enough to seat 20, though only set for 7. Candelabras holding black candles cast eerie shadows across walls decorated with weapons, animal heads, and what appeared to be a collection of shrunken heads. Gomez sat at the head of the table, Morticia to his right. The children occupied seats near them, with Grandmama at the other end. An empty chair apparently waited for Bellatrix, while one more setting seemed to be for someone who hadn't yet arrived. "Ah, our dimensional visitor!" Gomez exclaimed as Bellatrix entered, wand still firmly in hand. "Come, sit. We're having a family favorite tonight, Grandmama's arsenic gumbo." Bellatrix paused at the doorway. "Arsenic?" "Just a hint," Morticia assured her. "For flavor. We found our guests usually prefer a milder dose." Deciding that her magical resistance would likely protect her from mundane poisons, Bellatrix took the offered seat, though she positioned her wand on her lap, ready for quick use. "Before we begin," Morticia said smoothly, "perhaps introductions are in order. You've met my husband Gomez, my mother, and Lurch. These are our children, Wednesday and Pugsley." Wednesday stared at Bellatrix with unnerving intensity. "Your hair looks like it's been styled with electric shock. Did you do that on purpose, or is it a side effect of your dark magic?" Before Bellatrix could respond with an appropriately cutting remark, the final dinner guest entered, a completely bald man with wild eyes and a manic grin. "Sorry I'm late," he announced. "I was in the swamp catching leeches for my midnight therapy." "This is my brother, Fester," Gomez explained cheerfully. Fester's eyes widened as he spotted Bellatrix. A new face. And such a wonderfully deranged one. He rushed over and, before Bellatrix could stop him, kissed her hand with disgusting enthusiasm. "Enchanted, madam. Simply electrified to meet you." Bellatrix snatched her hand back, fighting the urge to hex his lips off. "Touch me again and you'll lose those fingers," she snarled. Rather than being offended, Fester looked delighted. "Ooh. A threat. I haven't had a good threat since that IRS auditor visited last spring. Remember, Gomez? The one who ran screaming into the night after seeing my collection of toe fungus cultures. How could I forget?" Gomez chuckled. The police never did find his other shoe. Lurch began serving the gumbo, which bubbled ominously and occasionally let out small puffs of purple smoke. Against her better judgment, Bellatrix found herself fascinated by these people. They weren't like any muggles she'd encountered, nor did they behave like any wizards she knew. "So, Miss Lestrange," Morticia began conversationally, "you mentioned a Dark Lord. Are you part of a cult, or is it more of a traditional master-servant relationship?" The casual question caught Bellatrix off guard. "The Dark Lord is the most powerful wizard alive," she said stiffly. "I am his most loyal lieutenant." "How fascinating," Morticia replied. "We had a Dark Lord visit once, didn't we, Gomez? That nice Mr. Crowley who wanted to use our living room for his ritual to summon the Ancient Ones. Delightful fellow." Gomez agreed enthusiastically. "Terrible at fencing, though. No follow-through." Bellatrix stabbed at her gumbo with her spoon. "You mock what you don't understand. The Dark Lord will cleanse the world of muggle filth and establish wizard dominance as nature intended." Morticia raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Cleansing rarely works out well for anyone involved. Just ask Aunt Calpurnia. She tried to cleanse her aura once and ended up with 3 extra toes and an uncontrollable urge to speak in Sumerian." "What's a muggle?" Pugsley asked, his mouth full of what appeared to be eyeballs floating in the gumbo. "Non-magical people," Bellatrix replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving away information. Wednesday's eyes narrowed. So you believe in magical superiority based on birth? Of course, Bellatrix snapped. Power is meant to dominate weakness. Wednesday mused. That seems inefficient. Grandmama says true power comes from knowing which mushroom will kill someone and which will just make them think they're a chicken for 6 hours. Bellatrix found herself oddly wrong-footed by the child's response. She'd expected fear, or at least shocked moral outrage. Instead, the girl seemed to be critiquing her ideology on practical grounds. You all speak of dark magic as if it's commonplace, Bellatrix observed, changing tactics. Yet I sense no magical ability in any of you. What are you? We're the Addams family, Gomez declared proudly, as if that explained everything. Been embracing the strange and unusual since the Middle Ages. My ancestor Goody Addams was the only witch in Salem who actually was practicing black magic, caused quite a stir when she turned the judge into a newt during her trial. It was all a terrible misunderstanding, Morticia added. The poor man was much happier as a newt. When they changed him back, he kept trying to eat flies for months afterward. Bellatrix set down her spoon with deliberate slowness. I don't understand. You claim magical heritage, yet I sense no magical core in any of you. You speak of darkness, yet I see no fear, no cruelty, no power. Morticia's smile remained gentle, but something in her eyes shifted, a deepening, like looking into a well and suddenly realizing you can't see the bottom. Miss Lestrange, I think perhaps you misunderstand what darkness truly is. I was born into the darkness, Bellatrix hissed. I've wielded it, shaped it, served it faithfully. I've tortured people until their minds shattered. I've killed without hesitation or remorse. Don't presume to lecture me on darkness. Rather than recoiling in horror at this confession, the entire family looked at Bellatrix with something akin to pity. Oh dear, Morticia said softly. You've confused darkness with cruelty. A common mistake, but no less tragic for its frequency. Before Bellatrix could respond to this incomprehensible statement, Thing scurried across the table and handed Gomez what appeared to be a telegram. Thank you, Thing, Gomez said, opening the paper. Ah. News from Cousin Itt. He's coming to visit next week, says he's grown another foot of hair and can't wait to show us his new conditioner. Bellatrix stared at the disembodied hand, which was now serving itself a small portion of gumbo. What is that thing? This is Thing, Morticia explained. He's been with the family for generations. A most loyal companion. Thing gave Bellatrix a friendly wave, then used 2 fingers to mimic legs walking through the air. No, not right now, Thing, Morticia responded as if understanding perfectly. Our guest needs time to adjust before the full tour. The casual acceptance of a sentient disembodied hand was the final straw for Bellatrix's already frayed nerves. Enough, she shouted, standing abruptly and raising her wand. I demand answers. What kind of magic protects you from my curses? How did I get here? And how do I return to my world? The family looked at her with varying expressions, Gomez with excitement, Morticia with serene patience, Wednesday with calculating interest, Pugsley with enthusiastic anticipation, Fester with childlike wonder, and Grandmama with the knowing look of someone who's seen this all before. Well, regarding your arrival, Grandmama began, my potion was designed to temporarily thin the veil between dimensions. You must have been near a corresponding weak point in your world. As for leaving, the portal should reopen in about 3 days when the cosmic alignment recurs. 3 days. Bellatrix's voice rose an octave. I cannot remain trapped here for 3 days. The Dark Lord will simply have to wait, Morticia finished for her. Interdimensional travel follows its own rules, I'm afraid. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay as our guest. And regarding your curse, Grandmama added, wiping her mouth with a black napkin, it didn't work because pain spells don't affect Addamses the way they do normal people. We find most forms of pain rather invigorating, Gomez explained cheerfully. Something in the family constitution. Been that way for generations. Bellatrix slowly sat back down, her mind racing. 3 days trapped with these bizarre people. 3 days away from the Dark Lord's service. 3 days to figure out what strange magic protected them, magic that might prove useful to her master's cause. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. I'll stay until the portal reopens. But don't expect me to play by your rules. Oh, we never play by rules, Gomez assured her. Too restricting. We prefer guidelines, or better yet, creative interpretations of suggestions. You'll find we're quite accommodating hosts, Morticia added. Feel free to practice your magic while you're here. The children would be particularly interested, I'm sure. Wednesday leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Could you show us how to cast that pain curse? For educational purposes. Pugsley bounced in his seat. Yeah. And any explosion spells. Do you know explosion spells? Despite herself, Bellatrix felt a flicker of genuine amusement. These strange children reminded her a bit of herself as a young girl, before Azkaban, before the years of servitude had stripped away everything except her devotion to the Dark Lord. Perhaps, she said noncommittally. If you behave. We never behave, Wednesday said flatly. It's against family tradition. Gomez let out a booming laugh. That's my girl. And Addams never behaves, we transcend behavior. After dinner, the family moved to what they called the living room, though Bellatrix thought dining room might be more appropriate, given the decor. Instruments of torture hung on the walls like prized artwork. A massive stuffed bear stood in one corner, posed in mid-attack. The furniture, though luxurious, all had a faintly medieval quality, as if designed for the comfort of particularly extravagant executioners. Would you care for a cigar? Gomez offered, producing an ornate box. I don't smoke, Bellatrix replied coldly. Wise choice, Morticia commented. Gomez's cigars have been known to cause spontaneous visions of the netherworld. Uncle Filigree was never quite the same after trying one, kept insisting that octopi were plotting to steal his teeth. Wednesday and Pugsley had settled on the floor, looking up at Bellatrix with unnerving attention. Show us some magic, Wednesday demanded. Yeah. Pugsley agreed. Make something explode. Bellatrix considered the request. Performing magic for these strange children seemed beneath her dignity as a Death Eater. On the other hand, she was curious to test the limits of whatever protection they seemed to have against her curses. Very well, she decided, raising her wand. But I require a subject. Fester immediately jumped up. Use me. Use me. I love being a test subject. Last week I let Pugsley test his new enhanced electric chair on me, gave me the most delightful tickle. Bellatrix looked at him skeptically but nodded. Stand there, she ordered, pointing to a clear area of the room. Fester practically skipped to the spot, vibrating with excitement. Incarcerus. Bellatrix cast. Ropes shot from her wand, wrapping tightly around Fester, binding his arms to his sides. Ooh! Rope magic! Fester exclaimed, not struggling at all. This reminds me of that lovely month I spent hogtied in a Mongolian shaman's yurt. Undeterred by his enthusiasm, Bellatrix flicked her wand again. Defindo! A cutting curse slashed across Fester's chest, slicing both the ropes and his clothing, but his pale skin remained unmarked. Tickles. Fester giggled. Do it again. Growling in frustration, Bellatrix escalated. Confringo. The blasting curse hit Fester square in the chest, powerful enough to blow a normal human through the wall. Instead, he merely stumbled back a few steps, his clothing now singed but his body unharmed. Wowie, he shouted, his eyes wider than ever. That was like the time I swallowed a firecracker, but all over. The children clapped appreciatively. Again. Pugsley demanded. Do the pain one, Wednesday suggested, her expression eager in a way that would have disturbed most adults. Bellatrix lowered her wand, staring at Fester with a mixture of frustration and fascination. "What are you people?" Morticia, who had been calmly knitting what appeared to be a tiny shroud throughout the demonstration, looked up with a gentle smile. "We're just a family, Miss Lestrange. With a few, unique characteristics." "Normal is an illusion," Gomez added cheerfully. "What is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly." "Speaking of spiders," Wednesday said, rising smoothly from the floor, "I should feed Theodora. She gets cranky if she misses dinner." To Bellatrix, she explained, "My pet black widow. I'm training her to recognize postal workers. I need to feed Snappy too." Pugsley exclaimed, jumping up. "He's my pet alligator. Want to help? He likes meeting new people, usually tries to bite their toes off as a sign of affection." Before Bellatrix could refuse, both children had grabbed her hands, pulling her toward the door with surprising strength. "Children," Morticia called after them, "don't overtire our guest. And remember, no feeding her to any of your pets without permission." "Yes, mother," they chorused in a way that did not inspire confidence. As Bellatrix was dragged from the room by the eager children, she caught one last glimpse of Morticia and Gomez. Gomez had moved to his wife's side and was passionately kissing his way up her arm, murmuring something that sounded like, "Cara mia," between kisses. Morticia's face held an expression of such intense love and desire that Bellatrix felt an unexpected twinge of something. Not envy, surely. Bellatrix Lestrange did not envy domestic bliss. And yet, there was something about the way they looked at each other, a darkness shared rather than imposed, a strength born of union rather than domination. Nonsense, she told herself firmly. Such thoughts were weakness. The only love that mattered was devotion to the Dark Lord and his cause. The children led Bellatrix to what they called the playroom, a chamber that looked more like a medieval torture chamber crossed with a mad scientist's laboratory. Strange contraptions of wood and metal occupied much of the floor space. Cages of various sizes lined one wall, many containing creatures that skittered and hissed as they entered. "This is Theodora," Wednesday announced, approaching a glass terrarium containing the largest black widow spider Bellatrix had ever seen. The creature was the size of a dinner plate, its red hourglass marking vivid against its glossy black body. "And this is Snappy." Pugsley proudly pointed to what appeared to be a full-sized alligator lounging in a pool built into the floor. The reptile raised its massive head at the sound of the boy's voice, its eyes fixing on Bellatrix with predatory interest. "You keep an alligator in your playroom," Bellatrix stated flatly. "Where else would we keep him?" Pugsley asked, genuinely confused. "The bathtub is already full of piranhas, and Mother says the dining room is impractical since he tries to eat the guests." Bellatrix found herself reassessing these children. There was something genuinely unsettling about them, not in the way she was accustomed to being feared, but in a deeper, more primal sense. They embraced danger with a casual enthusiasm that even she found unnerving. "Your parents allow this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Allow?" Wednesday's forehead crinkled slightly. "They encourage it. Mother always says that denying one's true nature leads to mediocrity, and mediocrity is the only true sin. Father gave me my first stick of dynamite when I was 3, Pugsley added proudly. I blew up the garden shed. Grandmama was so proud she baked me a special cake shaped like entrails." Bellatrix found herself oddly speechless. These children were being raised in an environment that celebrated the macabre, the dangerous, the dark, yet there was no cruelty in their eyes, no malice in their actions. Just a pure, almost innocent delight in things that would terrify normal children. "Now show us some more magic," Wednesday demanded. "Something dangerous." "Yeah." Pugsley agreed. "Can you make things catch fire with your mind? Or turn people inside out?" Bellatrix twirled her wand between her fingers, considering. "I could teach you the Cruciatus curse, the pain spell you saw earlier. In my world, it's forbidden." Using it on another human earns you a life sentence in the wizard prison. Rather than being intimidated, both children's eyes lit up. Forbidden magic, Wednesday breathed, looking more animated than Bellatrix had seen her yet. Is it difficult to learn? You need to mean it, Bellatrix explained, falling naturally into the role of instructor. You need to want to cause pain, to enjoy it, to feed on it. Pugsley frowned. But pain is just a sensation. Why would enjoying it be forbidden? Because normal people don't enjoy pain, Bellatrix said with a hint of condescension. That seems narrow-minded, Wednesday observed. Uncle Fester enjoys putting his head in a vice. Cousin Itt finds comfort in being repeatedly run over by a steamroller. Mother says pleasure and pain are just different expressions of the same fundamental experience. Again, Bellatrix found herself thrown off balance by these children's perspective. In her world, dark magic was forbidden precisely because it caused suffering, suffering that she and her fellow Death Eaters reveled in inflicting. Yet here were these strange children, casually discussing pain as if it were simply another facet of existence, neither good nor evil in itself. Your family is unusual, she finally said. Thank you, Wednesday replied solemnly, taking it as a compliment. Before Bellatrix could respond, a strange mechanical hand emerged from a box on a nearby table, its metal fingers beckoning urgently. That's the emergency signal, Pugsley explained, suddenly looking excited. Something's happening. The children rushed from the room, leaving Bellatrix to follow or be left behind. Choosing the former, she hurried after them, wand at the ready. They found the rest of the family gathered in the entrance hall, looking up at the ceiling, which appeared to be melting. A swirling vortex of darkness, similar to the one that had brought Bellatrix here but much larger, was forming above their heads. Fascinating! Grandmama exclaimed. The interdimensional portal is reactivating prematurely. Is this my way home? Bellatrix demanded, stepping forward eagerly. I wouldn't count on it, dear, Morticia replied calmly. Interdimensional portals are notoriously fickle. More likely she was interrupted as the portal pulsed violently, and 3 figures dropped through, landing with considerably less grace than Bellatrix had managed. Aurors. 3 of them, in their distinctive robes, looking disoriented but quickly raising their wands as they spotted Bellatrix. Lestrange, shouted the lead Auror, a young man with determined eyes. Surrender your wand immediately. Bellatrix's response was immediate and reflexive. Avada Kedavra. The killing curse shot from her wand directly at the lead Auror, but before it could reach him, something extraordinary happened. Lurch, moving with surprising speed for his size, stepped directly into the path of the spell. The green light struck him square in the chest. And he simply grunted, as if he'd been poked rather than hit with the most lethal curse in the wizarding world. Sir, Lurch rumbled disapprovingly, looking at Bellatrix. No killing guests. House rules. The Aurors stared in shock, momentarily forgetting to cast their own spells. Bellatrix was equally stunned. First her cruciatus had failed to cause pain, and now her killing curse had failed to kill. What was it about these people? Gomez stepped forward, twirling his mustache with one hand. Gentlemen. More visitors. What a delightful evening this is turning out to be. The Aurors exchanged confused glances, clearly thrown by this bizarre welcome in the midst of their pursuit of one of the wizarding world's most dangerous criminals. Sir, the lead Auror began cautiously, I don't know who you are, but that woman is extremely dangerous. Please step aside so we can apprehend her. Dangerous? Gomez looked at Bellatrix with new appreciation. Well, why didn't you say so? We love dangerous things in this house. Don't we, Tish? We certainly do, mon cher, Morticia agreed, gliding forward to stand beside her husband. Though I must say, gentlemen, it's considered rather rude in our world to drop in unannounced and immediately try to arrest one of our dinner guests. The Aurors looked increasingly confused. The lead Auror tried again. Ma'am, sir, this woman is Bellatrix Lestrange, a convicted murderer and follower of he who must not be named. She escaped from Azkaban prison and has killed several people during her flight. How impressive, Wednesday commented from where she stood with Pugsley. Have you really killed several people? She asked Bellatrix with what sounded disturbingly like professional admiration. Bellatrix, still reeling from the failure of her killing curse, nevertheless found herself straightening with pride. Dozens, she corrected. And tortured many more. Fascinating, Morticia murmured. You must tell us all about it over dessert. Grandmama has made her special finger-shaped cookies. They're not shaped like fingers, Pugsley whispered loudly to Bellatrix. They're actual fingers. From the cemetery. The youngest of the Aurors made a strangled noise of horror. Now see here, the lead Auror said more forcefully, we're taking Lestrange back to face justice, and anyone who interferes will be charged as an accomplice. Gomez's eyes lit up. Charged as an accomplice? How exciting. I haven't been charged with anything since that misunderstanding with the Vatican in '89. Darling, Morticia placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. Let's not be hasty. I'm sure our new guests would like some refreshment after their interdimensional journey before they start arresting people. Quite right, my dear, quite right. Gomez agreed enthusiastically. Lurch. Bring refreshments for our law enforcement visitors. Lurch groaned acknowledgement and shuffled off toward the kitchen. The Aurors were clearly at a loss. Their training had prepared them for combat with dark wizards, not for being treated as honored guests by a bizarre family who seemed utterly unperturbed by having a notorious criminal in their midst. Bellatrix, however, was recovering from her shock and calculating her options. These strange Addamses seemed immune to her most powerful curses, which meant they could potentially shield her from the Auror spells as well. Perhaps she could use this family as unwitting protection until she figured out how to return to the Dark Lord. These men want to take me back to Azkaban, she said to Morticia, allowing a note of vulnerability to enter her voice, a manipulation she rarely bothered with. A prison where they keep dementors, creatures that feed on happiness and drive their victims to madness. That sounds delightfully medieval, Morticia responded appreciatively, before turning to the Aurors with a more stern expression. Gentlemen, whatever Miss Lestrange may have done in your world, she is currently a guest in our home. The Addams family has a strict policy about hospitality. Once someone has broken bread at our table, they are under our protection until they choose to leave. Or until we decide to sacrifice them to the great old ones, Wednesday added helpfully. But that's only on solstices. The lead Auror looked increasingly desperate. This isn't a social matter. This is an international magical security issue. That woman is dangerous. So am I, darling, Morticia replied, her voice dropping to a lower, more intimate register that somehow filled the room despite its softness. So is everyone in this house. For the first time, something in Morticia's demeanor shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The shadows in the corners deepened, and even the flames of the candles burned darker somehow. The Aurors instinctively took a step back. Now, Morticia continued, her voice once again pleasant but firm, I suggest we all calm down and discuss this situation like civilized people. Over cookies. Lurch returned with a tray of disturbingly realistic finger-shaped cookies and a pitcher of what appeared to be green, smoking liquid. Absinthe, Gomez explained cheerfully. Made from wormwood grown in our own greenhouse. Has a tendency to cause temporary blindness and visions of dancing skeletons, but it really takes the edge off. The Aurors looked at each other, clearly realizing that they had entered a situation far beyond their normal experience. Slowly, the lead Auror lowered his wand, though he kept it in his hand. We'll discuss the situation, he conceded reluctantly. But Lestrange remains our prisoner. Guest, Morticia corrected gently. In the Addams house, everyone is a guest. Even those who arrive in chains. Which reminds me of Cousin Crimp, he spent 30 years as a guest of the Spanish Inquisition. Came back with the most fascinating stories and only minor psychological trauma. Bellatrix watched this exchange with growing fascination. Without casting a single spell, Morticia had effectively neutralized 3 trained Aurors. There was power there, not magical power as she understood it, but something equally effective. As the bizarre gathering moved to the living room, Bellatrix found herself re-evaluating her initial dismissal of these strange people. Perhaps there was something to learn here after all, something that even the Dark Lord might find valuable. The Aurors sat stiffly on an ancient-looking sofa that made ominous creaking sounds whenever they moved. The lead Auror kept his eyes fixed on Bellatrix, who deliberately took a seat next to Wednesday, using the child as a human shield of sorts, though she was beginning to suspect the girl might be more dangerous than she appeared. Now then, Morticia began pleasantly, perhaps introductions are in order. You know Miss Lestrange, and we are the Addams family. I'm Morticia, this is my husband Gomez, our children Wednesday and Pugsley, my mother, my brother Fester, and of course, Lurch. The lead Auror hesitated, then reluctantly introduced himself. Auror William Proudfoot. These are Aurors Savage and Hopkins. We've been tracking Lestrange since her escape from Azkaban. How exciting, Gomez commented. We've never been tracked by magical law enforcement before. Regular law enforcement, certainly, that incident with the escaped circus lions in Central Park led to quite the manhunt. But never magical. You're muggles, Auror Savage stated flatly, looking around at the bizarre decor. Aren't you? We prefer the term eccentrically gifted, Morticia replied smoothly. Though I understand muggles refers to non-magical people in your world. We may not have wands, but the Addams family has always had a special relationship with the supernatural. Proudfoot leaned forward, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. Mrs. Addams, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. Bellatrix Lestrange is a convicted murderer, a torturer, and a terrorist. She's killed countless innocent people and would kill everyone in this room without a second thought if it served her purpose. How refreshingly direct, Morticia commented, looking at Bellatrix with new interest. We so rarely meet people with such clear vocational focus. Bellatrix found herself smiling despite the situation. The Dark Lord requires dedication, she said simply. Ah, workplace loyalty, Gomez nodded approvingly. A rare quality these days. Auror Hopkins made a choking sound. This isn't funny. She's devoted to a maniac who wants to commit genocide. Young man, Grandmama piped up from her corner, where she'd been quietly mixing some concoction in a small cauldron. In my 300 years, I've found that one generation's maniac is another generation's visionary. Not that I'm defending genocide, terribly messy business, and it plays havoc with the spiritual ecosystem. Proudfoot looked at her sharply. 300 years. You're not a muggle. I'm an Addams, Grandmama replied, as if that explained everything. We tend to have unusual lifespans. My great-grandfather lived to be 743 before that unfortunate incident with the woodchipper. Though technically, his head lived another 12 years in that jar before deciding it was bored with the view. The Aurors exchanged alarmed glances. Bellatrix, however, was beginning to see the pattern. These Addamses weren't magical in the way she understood magic, but they weren't ordinary muggles either. They existed in some strange in-between space where the normal rules, both magical and mundane, seemed not to apply. I think, Morticia said thoughtfully, that we have a situation requiring compromise. Miss Lestrange is our guest until the portal reopens, which my mother informs me will be approximately 3 days from now. At that time, if she chooses to return to your world, you may resume your pursuit according to your laws. That's not a compromise. Proudfoot objected. That's just delaying her capture. I'm not going anywhere with you, Bellatrix snarled, her hand tightening on her wand. I'll kill you all first. Now, Gomez interjected cheerfully, let's not get ahead of ourselves with the killing. There's plenty of time for that later if necessary. Wednesday looked up at Bellatrix. If you kill them, can I watch? I'm doing a school project on violent death. Wednesday, Morticia gently admonished, what have we said about using guests' murders for school projects? Ask permission first, Wednesday recited dutifully. Bellatrix felt a startling urge to laugh. These people were utterly, gloriously mad in a way that even the Black family at its darkest had never achieved. Auror Proudfoot stood abruptly. This is insane. We're taking Lestrange now, and, he never finished the sentence. With a casual flick of her fingers, Morticia caused every candle in the room to flare suddenly higher, casting massive, distorted shadows on the walls. The temperature plummeted, and for a brief moment, the Aurors' reflections in the nearby mirror showed not themselves but decaying corpses. I'm afraid I must insist, Morticia said, her voice still soft but carrying an undercurrent that raised the hair on the back of Bellatrix's neck. The Addams family has extended its hospitality, and that is not a commitment we take lightly. Miss Lestrange will remain as our guest until the portal reopens. You gentlemen are welcome to stay as well, we have plenty of room, and I'm sure you'd find our collection of ancient cursed artifacts fascinating. Auror Savage whispered something to Proudfoot, who hesitated, then slowly sat back down. We'll stay to monitor the situation, he said stiffly. But if Lestrange makes any move to harm anyone or escape, we will take action. Wonderful! Gomez exclaimed, clapping his hands together. A full house. Lurch, prepare the East Wing guest rooms, the ones with the least aggressive gargoyles, I think. Lurch groaned acknowledgement and lumbered off. Bellatrix observed the exchange with growing intrigue. Somehow, without magic as she understood it, Morticia had cowed 3 trained Aurors. There was real power in that, power the Dark Lord might appreciate if she could understand its source. As the bizarre evening continued, with Fester enthusiastically showing the increasingly disturbed Aurors his collection of shrunken heads and Pugsley attempting to convince them to let him borrow their wands for just a small experiment, Bellatrix found herself watching Morticia. The pale woman moved through the chaotic scene with unfailing grace, managing both her unusual family and their unwilling guests with subtle authority. She never raised her voice, never made overt threats, and yet somehow everyone, including Bellatrix herself, found themselves following her lead. Later, as the household finally prepared for bed, Bellatrix found herself alone with Morticia in the hallway outside her guest room. I trust you'll find everything comfortable, Morticia said. The bed has been in the family for 12 generations. Marie Antoinette allegedly spent her last night before the guillotine on that very mattress. Why are you protecting me? Bellatrix asked bluntly. You know what I am. What I've done. Morticia tilted her head slightly, regarding Bellatrix with those unfathomable dark eyes. Do I? I've killed people. Tortured them. I enjoy it. Bellatrix made the confession a challenge. We all have our hobbies, Morticia replied mildly. Uncle Fester collects toenail clippings from famous dictators. We don't judge. Bellatrix felt frustration rising within her. You don't understand. I'm evil. Truly evil. I serve the Dark Lord who will cleanse the world of filth like you. For the first time, Morticia's serene expression shifted to something like pity. Oh, Miss Lestrange. Evil isn't about torture or killing or even serving Dark Lords. Those are just activities. Methods. True darkness is much more profound. What would you know of darkness? Bellatrix sneered, though the words lacked her usual conviction. Morticia smiled, a small, secretive curve of her lips that somehow made the shadows in the hallway deepen. The Addams family has embraced the dark for generations, Miss Lestrange. Not as a weapon or a means to power, but as a home. As a lover. As the truth of existence. She stepped closer, and Bellatrix found herself unable to move as Morticia gently touched her cheek, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that Bellatrix nearly flinched. You use darkness, Morticia said softly. We are darkness. And perhaps during your stay with us, you'll come to understand the difference. With that, she turned and glided away, leaving Bellatrix standing alone in the hallway, her certainties shaken in a way that not even Azkaban had managed. As she entered her room and closed the door, Bellatrix caught a glimpse of her reflection in the ancient, tarnished mirror on the wall. For a brief moment, she thought she saw not herself but a scared, broken woman behind the mask of cruelty she'd worn for so long. Angrily, she turned away. Nonsense. She was Bellatrix Lestrange, the Dark Lord's most faithful servant. These strange people with their bizarre philosophy of darkness couldn't possibly understand true power. And yet, as she lay in the ancient bed, listening to the house creak and moan around her, Bellatrix couldn't shake the feeling that she had encountered something in Morticia Addams that she didn't fully understand, something that, despite herself, she wanted to understand. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of darkness, not the familiar darkness of violence and power, but a deeper, older darkness that embraced rather than threatened, that nurtured rather than destroyed. And somewhere in that darkness, Morticia's voice echoed, "You use darkness. We are darkness." The difference seemed suddenly important in a way Bellatrix couldn't quite grasp. But she had 3 days in this strange mansion to figure it out. 3 days that, unbeknownst to her, would change her understanding of darkness forever. Chapter 2, Gardens of Darkness. Bellatrix woke to the sound of screaming. Not the kind of screaming she usually enjoyed, the desperate, pleading cries of victims under her wand. No, this was different, childish shrieks of delight mixed with what sounded like growling. She sat up in the ancient bed, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back, the portal, the strange Addams family, the Aurors who had followed her. The screaming continued, punctuated now by maniacal laughter. Grabbing her wand from beneath her pillow, Bellatrix approached the window and peered out into the grey morning light. In the mansion's overgrown backyard, Wednesday and Pugsley were engaged in what appeared to be a game. A game that involved Pugsley being suspended upside down over a bubbling cauldron while Wednesday slowly lowered him by a rope. 3 more inches and the piranhas will be able to reach your ears. Wednesday called out, her usually expressionless face showing a hint of excitement. Do it faster. Pugsley shouted back, his face red from being upside down. I want to see if they can strip my head to the skull before Mom calls us for breakfast. Bellatrix stared. Even by her standards, these children were disturbing. And yet, there was something oddly familiar about their play. Something that reminded her of her own childhood with Andromeda and Narcissa, before everything changed, before the Dark Lord gave her life purpose and direction. She shook away the unwelcome comparison. These were strange Muggle children, nothing more. Potentially useful pawns in her temporary predicament, but nothing more. Getting dressed in her somewhat tattered black robes, the only clothing she had, Bellatrix decided that today would be dedicated to understanding this family's strange immunity to her magic. If she could discover their secret, it might prove valuable to the Dark Lord. And if manipulating the children was the easiest way to gain that knowledge, then so be it. She made her way downstairs, navigating the creaking corridors of the mansion. From somewhere nearby came the sound of an explosion, followed by delighted cackling that could only be Uncle Fester. The portrait she passed seemed to watch her with malevolent eyes, and one particularly lifelike painting of an ancient Addams patriarch actually hissed at her as she walked by. In the dining room, she found Morticia and Gomez already at breakfast. Gomez was reading a newspaper upside down while Morticia delicately sipped from a steaming cup of something that smelled strongly of nightshade. Ah, our dimensional visitor awakens. Gomez exclaimed, flipping the newspaper closed with theatrical flair. Sleep well. The spirits that haunt that bedroom are usually quite considerate about keeping their wailing to a minimum between the hours of 3 and 5. I slept fine, Bellatrix replied curtly, taking a seat as far from the Aurors as possible. The 3 men were huddled at the far end of the table, looking exhausted and jumpy. Clearly, they'd had a less restful night than she had. Wonderful, Morticia said, her voice as smooth and cool as silk. I trust the screams of eternal torment from the East Wing didn't disturb you. Uncle Fester has been experimenting with a new record player that captures the sounds of the damned. So thoughtful of him to share his hobbies. I've heard worse, Bellatrix replied, thinking of Azkaban. Lurch appeared silently beside her, placing a plate of what appeared to be scrambled eggs in front of her. At least, she assumed they were eggs, despite the unusual green color and the fact that they seemed to be slowly pulsating. "What is this?" she demanded, poking at the food with her fork. "Vulture eggs with nightshade," Morticia explained. "A family favorite. The mild paralytic effect is so invigorating first thing in the morning." Auror Proudfoot looked up from his untouched plate. "You're trying to poison us." Gomez burst into laughter. "Poison? My dear fellow, if we wanted to poison you, we'd use something much more dramatic. Morticia's collection of deadly toxins is renowned throughout the, well, let's just say certain circles find her expertise quite impressive." Morticia smiled modestly. "Darling, you flatter me. I'm just a simple enthusiast." Bellatrix, deciding that her magical resistance would likely protect her from whatever was in the food, took a cautious bite. The taste was surprisingly complex, earthy and rich, with an aftertaste that made her tongue tingle pleasantly. "It's good," she admitted reluctantly. "I'm so pleased you enjoy it," Morticia said. "After breakfast, I thought you might like to join me in the conservatory. I'm tending to my carnivorous plants this morning, and I find few activities more soothing for contemplation." Before Bellatrix could respond, the children burst into the dining room, soaking wet and smelling strongly of swamp water. Pugsley's face was covered in small, bleeding bites, which he displayed proudly. "Mom! Dad! The piranhas almost got to my brain," he announced triumphantly. "How wonderful, darling," Morticia responded with genuine maternal pride. "Next time, try tilting your head at a slight angle, it gives them better access to the temples." Wednesday approached Bellatrix, her dark eyes intense with interest. "You said you'd teach us that pain spell." The Aurors immediately tensed, hands moving to their wands. Bellatrix smiled slowly, seeing an opportunity. "So I did. Perhaps after breakfast?" "Absolutely not." Proudfoot snapped. "Teaching unforgivable curses to children? That's a one-way ticket to Azkaban all by itself." "Unforgivable?" Wednesday's eyes widened with interest. "What makes a curse unforgivable?" "Their use on another human being is punishable by lifetime imprisonment," Auror Hopkins explained stiffly. "How arbitrary," Wednesday commented. "Pugsley used a flamethrower on me last week, and Mom just made him promise to aim away from my face next time." "Family interactions have their own rules, of course," Morticia interjected smoothly. "Though I must say, I'm intrigued by this classification system. In our experience, intent matters far more than method." Bellatrix found herself nodding in agreement before catching herself. This was ridiculous. She didn't agree with these strange people about anything. And yet, the idea that the Ministry classified spells based on their effects rather than the will behind them had always seemed simplistic to her. A levitation charm could kill as easily as Avada Kedavra if used with proper creativity. The unforgivables require intent, she found herself explaining. You have to mean them. You have to want to cause pain, to control, to kill. Fascinating, Morticia murmured. Like our family guillotine. It's not the blade that matters, but the joy one takes in using it. Gomez beamed at his wife. Tish, when you talk about execution devices. He grabbed her hand and began kissing his way up her arm passionately. You know what it does to me. Later, mon cher, Morticia purred, gently extracting her arm. We have guests. Bellatrix watched this exchange with a mixture of disgust and fascination. Their obvious passion for each other was so raw, so unrestrained, yet it lacked the cruelty she associated with desire. There was darkness there, certainly, but it was a darkness they shared rather than inflicted. After breakfast, true to her word, Morticia led Bellatrix to the conservatory, a massive greenhouse attached to the east wing of the mansion. Unlike traditional greenhouses, however, this one seemed designed to minimize sunlight rather than capture it. The glass was tinted a deep smoky black, and heavy curtains could be drawn to protect the most light-sensitive specimens. "Welcome to my garden," Morticia said, her voice taking on a warmer tone as she gestured to the exotic collection of plants surrounding them. Bellatrix had expected something impressive, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Every plant in Morticia's conservatory was deadly in some way. Massive Venus flytraps large enough to consume a human head snapped eagerly as they passed. Writhing vines covered in barbs dripped with venom. Flowers of extraordinary beauty released visible clouds of poisonous pollen. "This is impressive," Bellatrix admitted, genuinely awed despite herself. "Thank you," Morticia replied, gently stroking a plant that shuddered with what appeared to be pleasure at her touch. "I find that deadly things respond best to tenderness. They've had so little of it in their existence." She moved through the conservatory with the same grace she displayed in all her movements, stopping to tend to each plant with meticulous care. To Bellatrix's amazement, even the most aggressive specimens seemed to gentle under Morticia's touch. "How do you do that?" she asked, watching as Morticia hand-fed what appeared to be raw meat to a plant with razor-sharp teeth. "Do what, my dear?" "Control them without magic." Morticia looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't control them. I understand them. I appreciate their nature." She gazed fondly at the carnivorous plant as it devoured the last of its meal. "Each deadly thing has its own beauty, its own purpose. Fighting against that nature only leads to suffering on both sides." Bellatrix followed Morticia deeper into the greenhouse, where the plants became even more exotic and dangerous. A low mist hugged the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and growth intermingled, not unpleasant, but primal and intense. "You know," Morticia said conversationally as she used silver scissors to deadhead a bush covered in thorns as long as daggers, "I've been wondering about your Dark Lord." Bellatrix immediately stiffened. "What about him?" "I'm curious about what draws you to him." Morticia carefully placed the severed flower heads in a black basket. "Is it love? Fear? A shared vision?" "He is power," Bellatrix replied automatically. "He will cleanse the wizarding world of weakness and impurity." "I see." Morticia moved to the next plant, a twisted, grotesque thing that moaned softly as she approached. "And what happens after this, cleansing?" The question caught Bellatrix off guard. She'd spent so long fighting for the Dark Lord's cause that she rarely thought about what would come after victory. "We will rule," she said, though the word sounded hollow even to her own ears. "The strong will control the weak, as nature intended." "Nature rarely works so simply," Morticia observed, gently massaging the soil around a plant whose leaves were edged with crystalline structures that Bellatrix suspected were poisonous. "In my garden, I find that strength takes many forms. This little one, for instance," she indicated a small, unremarkable brown plant hidden beneath larger specimens, "produces the most deadly toxin in my collection. Yet it requires the shade and protection of its larger neighbors to thrive." Bellatrix frowned. "What's your point?" "No point, dear. Just an observation." Morticia straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "In the Addams family, we've always believed that true darkness isn't about destruction or domination. It's about embracing the whole of existence, the beautiful and the terrible, the powerful and the vulnerable." "That sounds like weakness," Bellatrix scoffed. "Does it?" Morticia's voice remained gentle, but her eyes held Bellatrix's with surprising intensity. "Tell me, in your pursuit of power, what joy have you found?" The question hit Bellatrix like a physical blow. Joy. She'd found satisfaction in serving the Dark Lord, pride in being his most faithful servant, pleasure in causing pain to his enemies. But joy? The concept seemed foreign, almost childish. Before she could formulate a response, a thunderous crash echoed from somewhere in the mansion, followed by the sound of breaking glass and Pugsley's delighted laughter. Morticia sighed, though she didn't seem particularly concerned. It appears the children have found your Auror friends. Shall we investigate? They found the source of the commotion in the library, a vast, gloomy room lined with ancient tomes bound in materials Bellatrix suspected weren't all animal hide. Pugsley had somehow managed to construct a catapult from furniture parts and was launching what appeared to be small explosive devices at a makeshift target. Wednesday sat nearby, calmly taking notes as each projectile detonated. The three Aurors had taken cover behind an enormous desk, their wands out but expressions uncertain, clearly torn between stopping the dangerous activity and not wanting to harm children, even these children. "Pugsley, darling," Morticia said, her voice carrying easily over the chaos, "what have we said about indoor explosions before noon?" "Only in the basement or dungeon," Pugsley recited dutifully, looking slightly abashed. "Sorry, Mom." "And Wednesday, are you logging the blast radius properly? Remember your father's advice about scientific method." "Yes, Mother," Wednesday replied. "I'm tracking velocity, payload dispersion, and fragmentation patterns." She held up her notebook, which contained surprisingly detailed diagrams and calculations. Proudfoot emerged cautiously from behind the desk. "Mrs. Addams, your son was throwing explosives at us." "No, I wasn't," Pugsley objected. "You were just near the target. If I wanted to hit you, I would have adjusted the trajectory by approximately 12 degrees. He demonstrated with his hands, showing a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of physics. "The boy has a point," Gomez declared, suddenly appearing in the doorway, twirling his mustache excitedly. "Pugsley's aim has improved tremendously since he took up bomb-making as a hobby. Last month he could barely hit the broadside of a hearse." Bellatrix watched this exchange with growing interest. These children, who appeared so strange and morbid, were actually being encouraged in their destructive tendencies, but with discipline and scientific rigor. It was so different from her own upbringing, where dark inclinations were either brutally suppressed or channeled solely toward maintaining blood purity and family honor. "I want to try," she found herself saying, stepping forward toward Pugsley's contraption. The boy's face lit up. "Really? Do you want to use regular dynamite or the special blend Grandmama made from bat guano and her secret ingredient?" "Pugsley," Wednesday hissed. "We're not supposed to mention the secret ingredient since the FDA investigation." Bellatrix grinned wickedly, feeling a familiar rush of destructive pleasure. "Let's use the special blend. And let's aim it at our Auror friends." Proudfoot and his colleagues immediately raised their wands. "That's enough," Proudfoot shouted. "Lestrange, step away from the device." "Oh, don't be such spoilsports," Gomez chided the Aurors. "A little recreational explosion never hurt anyone." "Well, except Cousin Farouk, but that was less about the explosion and more about his unfortunate decision to use himself as the launch pad." "Mr. Addams," Hopkins said through gritted teeth, "your family's eccentricities aside, that woman is a dangerous criminal, and she's now attempting to attack officers of magical law enforcement." "Attack is such a harsh word," Morticia interjected smoothly. "I prefer to think of it as aggressive play. Isn't that right, Miss Lestrange?" Bellatrix found herself caught in Morticia's gaze again, those dark eyes that somehow saw through her performance to something deeper. For a brief moment, she felt an unfamiliar urge to lower her guard, to admit that yes, she had just been playing, testing boundaries, seeking reaction, like a child acting out. Instead, she scowled and stepped away from the catapult. "Whatever. Your toys are childish anyway. Perhaps you prefer to show us some of your magic instead?" Wednesday suggested, her intense gaze fixed on Bellatrix's wand. "Something destructive but educational." "Absolutely not," Proudfoot interjected. "No magic from the prisoner." "Guest," Morticia corrected gently. "Miss Lestrange, if you'd like to demonstrate something magical, perhaps something less combative?" Morticia suggested, giving Proudfoot a serene but somehow quelling look. "I'm sure the children would appreciate seeing different aspects of your abilities." Bellatrix considered the request. She could refuse, of course, but something about these strange children's eager faces made her hesitate. When was the last time anyone had looked at her with interest rather than terror? Even among the Death Eaters, she was feared more than admired. Fine, she decided, raising her wand. One spell. Something, educational. The Aurors tensed but didn't intervene as Bellatrix focused on a nearby vase, an ugly, misshapen thing that appeared to be made from an actual human skull. With a flick of her wand, she transfigured it into a silver serpent that slithered across the table, its scales gleaming in the dim library light. Cool! Pugsley exclaimed, reaching out to touch it. Careful, Bellatrix warned, surprising herself with the protective impulse. It's not a real snake, but the transfiguration includes venom. Wednesday's eyes widened slightly, the most expression Bellatrix had seen on the girl's face. You can create venomous creatures from inanimate objects. The practical applications are fascinating. If I were you, Aurors Savage muttered, I'd be more concerned about the fact that she casually created a deadly weapon in front of your children. Nonsense, Gomez declared cheerfully. Every Addams learns to handle venomous creatures before they learn to walk. Why, Wednesday's first pet was a black mamba. Tragically short-lived relationship, the poor snake never recovered from the poisoning. Bellatrix looked at Wednesday with new respect. You poisoned a black mamba? It was an accident, Wednesday replied with a hint of embarrassment. I was experimenting with toxin extraction and inadvertently cross-contaminated my samples. A regrettable methodological error. Bellatrix felt a startling urge to laugh, not her usual manic cackle, but something genuine. These children spoke of death and poison with the same casual expertise that pureblood children discussed Quidditch teams. Perhaps, Morticia suggested, Miss Lestrange would be willing to continue this educational demonstration in the conservatory, where there's more space and fewer priceless family heirlooms at risk. And fewer Aurors, Bellatrix added with a pointed look at Proudfoot. I'm afraid we'll need to accompany you, Proudfoot replied stiffly. Prisoner monitoring protocols. Of course, Morticia agreed before Bellatrix could object. Though I must insist you respect the more sensitive specimens in my collection. Several of my plants are quite shy around strangers and tend to express their anxiety by releasing neurotoxins. The way back to the conservatory was interrupted by the appearance of Thing, scurrying across the floor with surprising speed, carrying what appeared to be a letter. What is it, Thing? Gomez asked, taking the envelope. Ah. Cousin Itt is arriving early. Says he's simply dying to meet our interdimensional visitors. Cousin Itt? Bellatrix questioned. A most distinguished relative, Morticia explained. Brilliant conversationalist, though his dialect can be challenging for newcomers to understand. He speaks an ancient language? Bellatrix asked, momentarily intrigued despite herself. He speaks in squeaks, Pugsley clarified helpfully. But you get used to it. Before Bellatrix could process this bizarre information, a new commotion erupted from the front of the house, the sound of tires screeching, followed by an enthusiastic honking that played what sounded like a funeral dirge. He's here. Gomez announced excitedly, rushing toward the entrance hall. The others followed, Bellatrix and the Aurors bringing up the rear with matching expressions of wary curiosity. The front door burst open to reveal what Bellatrix at first mistook for a walking carpet, an entity completely covered in long, blonde hair from head to foot, wearing a small hat and sunglasses perched somehow on top of the hair. Itt, old man. Gomez greeted enthusiastically, embracing the hair-covered figure. Wonderful to see you. You're looking magnificently hirsute as always. Cousin Itt responded with a series of high-pitched squeaks and chatters that made absolutely no sense to Bellatrix. Yes, the drive was treacherous, I'm sure, Morticia responded as if the sounds had been perfectly comprehensible. The fog this time of year is simply murderous on the mountain roads. More squeaking followed as Itt seemed to notice Bellatrix and the Aurors. Indeed, we do have visitors, Morticia confirmed. Miss Bellatrix Lestrange, a witch from another dimension, and 3 magical law enforcement officers who followed her through the portal. Itt squeaked enthusiastically, bouncing slightly on what Bellatrix assumed were feet hidden somewhere beneath the hair. "No, I don't think interdimensional travel is available to the general public yet," Gomez replied to whatever Itt had said. "Though it would make family vacations to the Bermuda Triangle so much more convenient." Bellatrix stared in disbelief as the entire Addams family carried on a perfectly normal conversation with what appeared to be an ambulatory mop. Even the children and Fester chimed in, apparently understanding Itt's bizarre language without difficulty. "I'm hallucinating," Auror Hopkins muttered beside her. "That's the only explanation. The food was drugged, and I'm having a particularly vivid hallucination." "If you are, we're sharing it," Savage replied grimly. Itt suddenly turned toward Bellatrix and squeaked interrogatively, gesturing with hair-covered arms. "He wants to know if you can do the torture curse on him," Wednesday translated helpfully. "Cousin Itt enjoys novel sensations." What?" Bellatrix blinked, genuinely at a loss. More enthusiastic squeaking followed. "He says he's tried most forms of conventional torture, but magical torture might have unique neurological effects he'd like to document for his research," Morticia explained. "Cousin Itt has 3 doctorates, you know. From hair universities." Hopkins muttered, earning a sharp elbow from Proudfoot. "Absolutely not," Proudfoot declared more loudly. "No unforgivable curses will be performed while we're here." Itt squeaked what sounded distinctly disappointed even to Bellatrix's untrained ears. "Perhaps another time, Itt," Morticia soothed. "We're currently observing certain protocols due to our law enforcement guests." "But speaking of guests," Gomez interjected enthusiastically, "this calls for a celebration. Itt's arrival coinciding with visitors from another dimension, why, it's practically cosmic. Lurch. Prepare the grand hall for a gathering tonight. Call Cousin Lumpy and the gruesome twins. This is a momentous occasion." Lurch appeared from nowhere with his usual impeccable timing and groaned acknowledgement. "A party?" Proudfoot looked alarmed. "That's not appropriate given the circumstances." "Nonsense." Gomez dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "The Addams family has celebrated imprisonment, executions, and funeral pyres throughout history. A little interdimensional fugitive situation is practically mundane by comparison." Morticia placed a calming hand on her husband's arm. "What Gomez means is that hospitality is an Addams tradition regardless of circumstance. A small family gathering would allow all our guests to experience our customs fully." Bellatrix watched this exchange with growing fascination. The idea of a party seemed ludicrous given her situation, trapped in a strange dimension, pursued by Aurors, separated from her Dark Lord. And yet, when was the last time she'd attended any social gathering that wasn't focused on torture, killing, or planning wizard supremacy? Not since before Azkaban, she realized with a jolt. Not since she was young, before everything in her life narrowed to service and devotion to the Dark Lord. "I think a party sounds splendid," she found herself saying, as much to annoy the Aurors as anything else. Proudfoot looked ready to object again, but Aurors Savage whispered something in his ear, and after a moment's consideration, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. A small gathering. But Lestrange remains under our supervision at all times." "Marvelous." Gomez clapped his hands together. "This calls for my special occasion cigars, imported from the deepest jungles of Borneo, rolled on the thighs of blind mystics during the dark of the moon." "Darling, your enthusiasm is enchanting," Morticia murmured, "but perhaps we should let Cousin Itt get settled first. And I believe I was about to show Miss Lestrange more of my conservatory." Of course," Gomez agreed readily. "Itt, old man, Lurch will show you to your usual room. We've kept the hairballs you left last time in a special display case." As the family dispersed to make preparations for the evening's event, Morticia once again led Bellatrix toward the conservatory, the Aurors following at a watchful distance. This time, however, she guided Bellatrix to a different section, a part of the greenhouse shrouded in deeper shadows, where the plants seemed older, more sentient somehow. "This is my special collection," Morticia explained, her voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "Plants with particular awareness." Bellatrix felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The plants in this section didn't just seem alive, they seemed to be watching. Vines shifted subtly as they passed, not because of any breeze but as if tracking their movements. Flowers turned to face them with unsettling precision. "This one," Morticia said, stopping before what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary rose bush with black blooms, "is my particular favorite. The midnight thorn. Legend says it grows only where a powerful witch has died, feeding on the residual magic in her blood." Bellatrix approached the plant cautiously, her instincts warning her that it was far more dangerous than it appeared. "It looks like a normal rose. Many deadly things disguise themselves as beauty," Morticia replied, carefully pruning dead leaves from the plant. "But the midnight thorn has another quality that makes it special. It's said to respond to the darkness in one's soul. The deeper the darkness, the more strongly it reacts." As if on cue, the roses on the bush trembled slightly, their petals unfurling further as Bellatrix drew nearer. "See how it responds to you?" Morticia observed. "It recognizes something kindred." Bellatrix reached out a hand, almost touching one of the black blooms. To her astonishment, the flower leaned toward her, straining to make contact. "What happens if it touches me?" she asked, her voice unexpectedly hushed. "That depends entirely on you," Morticia replied enigmatically. "On the nature of your darkness." Bellatrix hesitated, then deliberately touched the center of the nearest bloom. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the black petals began to lighten, color bleeding from them until they turned a brilliant, shocking white. "Interesting," Morticia murmured, genuine surprise in her voice. "I've never seen it do that before." Bellatrix snatched her hand back, disturbed without knowing why. "What does it mean?" "The midnight thorn reflects truth, not appearance," Morticia said, studying Bellatrix with those penetrating dark eyes. "Perhaps there's more light in your darkness than you realize." "That's absurd," Bellatrix snapped, suddenly angry. "I am the Dark Lord's most faithful servant. I've killed and tortured more people than you've met in your lifetime. There is no light in me." Morticia didn't argue, simply regarding Bellatrix with that same serene, knowing expression that made Bellatrix want to scream, or curse her, or both. "Sometimes," Morticia said finally, "the roles we play become so familiar we mistake them for our true selves." Before Bellatrix could form a suitably scathing response, Auror Proudfoot cleared his throat loudly, reminding them of his presence. "If you're done with the gardening lesson, we should return to the main house," he said stiffly. "Better visibility there." "Of course," Morticia agreed graciously. "We should all prepare for tonight's gathering. Miss Lestrange, I took the liberty of having Lurch place some suitable attire in your room. The Addams family tends toward formal dress for our celebrations." Bellatrix blinked in surprise. "You're lending me clothes?" "Naturally. We couldn't have you attending in those prison rags. Besides, black is rather your color, I think. It complements your intensity." The idea of wearing borrowed clothes from this strange woman should have been offensive. Bellatrix Lestrange, scion of the noble and most ancient house of Black, did not accept charity. And yet, the thought of clean, appropriate attire after months of wearing the same tattered robes was undeniably appealing. "Fine," she conceded gracelessly. "But nothing with lace or frills." "I wouldn't dream of it," Morticia assured her with the ghost of a smile. "Severity suits you." Back in her room, Bellatrix found several gowns laid out on the bed, all black, all elegant, but with distinctly different styles. One in particular caught her eye, a high-necked, form-fitting dress of heavy silk with intricate silver embroidery around the collar and cuffs. It reminded her somewhat of the formal robe she'd worn to pureblood gatherings in her youth, before Azkaban, before everything changed. She hesitated, then lifted the dress, surprised by the quality of the fabric. These strange Addams people were full of contradictions. They lived in a decrepit mansion filled with macabre oddities, yet possessed items of genuine luxury and refinement. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "What?" she called sharply, reflexively raising her wand. The door opened to reveal Wednesday, still in her usual braided hairstyle and somber black dress. "Mother sent me to help you prepare for the gathering," she said flatly. "Though I don't see why you need help. Death and destruction require no embellishment." Bellatrix snorted, oddly amused by the girl's morbid perspective. "I don't need help dressing." "I'm not here to help you dress," Wednesday clarified. "I'm here to provide accessories." She held up a small wooden box. "Family heirlooms. Mother thought they might complement your aesthetic." Curious despite herself, Bellatrix allowed the girl to enter. Wednesday placed the box on the dressing table and opened it carefully, revealing an assortment of jewelry that immediately captured Bellatrix's attention. Unlike the gaudy trinkets favored by many pure-blood families, these pieces were elegant in their darkness. Silver and black gems predominated, crafted into designs that suggested both beauty and danger. "This one belonged to Great-Aunt Lavinia," Wednesday explained, lifting a choker made of intricately worked silver set with obsidian. "She wore it to her third husband's execution. They say his ghost still appears when it's worn under a full moon." "And this?" Bellatrix pointed to a heavy silver ring set with a large black stone that seemed to swallow light. "Grandmama Addams's engagement ring. The stone is supposedly a fragment of a meteorite that drove an entire village mad when it fell to Earth in 1767. Wednesday's voice remained perfectly monotone, yet there was unmistakable pride in her recitation of the family history. Despite herself, Bellatrix was impressed by both the craftsmanship of the pieces and their alleged dark histories. They reminded her of some of the Black family heirlooms, objects of beauty with sinister pasts and dangerous powers. "Your family collects dark objects," she observed, lifting a silver hair comb studded with tiny daggers that looked sharp enough to draw blood. "We appreciate objects with character," Wednesday corrected. "Things that have witnessed suffering tend to develop more interesting qualities than those that haven't." Bellatrix found herself nodding in agreement before she caught herself. She needed to stop finding common ground with these people. They weren't like her. They couldn't be. "Why is your family like this?" she demanded abruptly. "Why do you embrace darkness and death when most normal people fear it?" Wednesday considered the question with surprising seriousness for a child her age. "Fear is based on the unknown. We don't fear darkness because we understand it. It's part of us." She picked up a silver bracelet shaped like a small serpent. "Besides, what others call darkness, we simply call life in its fullest expression. Pain, death, decay, they're just as natural as pleasure, birth, and growth." The sentiment was expressed so matter-of-factly that Bellatrix found herself momentarily speechless. This child, this strange, solemn girl, had just articulated a philosophy that resonated uncomfortably with something deep inside her, not the part that served the Dark Lord, but something older, more fundamental. "You're a strange child," Bellatrix finally said. "Thank you," Wednesday replied, taking it as a compliment. "Mother says I was born with an old soul. Pugsley was born with excess electricity in his brain. We each have our gifts." Another knock at the door heralded the arrival of Lurch, who groaned something unintelligible. "He says dinner will be served in 1 hour, and the guests are beginning to arrive," Wednesday translated. "I should go help Pugsley with the man-eating plants in the entryway. Mother likes them to be properly stimulated before they meet new people, keeps them from getting overexcited and consuming the guests prematurely." With that disturbing statement, she departed, leaving Bellatrix alone with her thoughts and the box of dark jewelry. An hour later, dressed in the borrowed gown and wearing the obsidian choker that had supposedly witnessed an execution, Bellatrix made her way toward the sound of music and voices. The Aurors, also dressed in formal attire provided by their hosts, though looking distinctly uncomfortable about it, fell into step behind her. Remember, Proudfoot muttered, no funny business. We're watching your every move. How terrifying, Bellatrix mocked. 3 ministry puppets in borrowed clothes. I'm trembling with fear. The grand hall of the Addams mansion had been transformed for the occasion. Candelabras holding black candles provided eerie illumination that cast long shadows across the room. The usual instruments of torture that decorated the walls had been polished to a gleaming shine. A long table laden with food occupied one wall, dishes that steamed ominously, beverages in unnatural colors, and what appeared to be a cake decorated to resemble a mausoleum. But most striking were the guests. Bellatrix had expected more conventional visitors, perhaps equally eccentric humans, but humans nonetheless. What she found instead defied categorization. A man who appeared to be half transformed into some kind of lizard creature conversed casually with a woman whose skin was an unnatural shade of green. In one corner, what looked like a walking corpse in an impeccable suit sipped delicately from a goblet of thick, red liquid. Cousin Itt stood surrounded by admirers, his incomprehensible squeaking punctuated by bursts of laughter from his audience. Ah, our guest of honor arrives! Gomez exclaimed, spotting Bellatrix. He hurried over, resplendent in a pinstriped suit that somehow managed to look both archaic and elegant. Miss Lestrange. You look positively lethal this evening. Doesn't she, Tish? Morticia glided up beside her husband, a vision in a form-fitting black gown that seemed to flow like liquid shadow. Indeed. That choker suits you perfectly, as if it were made for you. Who are all these people? Bellatrix demanded, gesturing around at the bizarre assemblage. Family, friends, the occasional archenemy, the usual social mix, Gomez explained cheerfully. That's Cousin Vlad by the punch bowl, he's going through a liquid diet phase. And over there is Margaret, she's been experimenting with plant-human hybridization. The results are botanically fascinating, though she does need to be kept away from herbicides. They're not human, Bellatrix stated flatly. Such a limited perspective, Morticia commented gently. The Addams family has always believed that humanity is more a state of mind than a biological classification. Before Bellatrix could respond to this philosophical absurdity, they were approached by what appeared to be an elderly man with an unnaturally elongated face and bulging eyes. Cousin Lumpy. Gomez greeted enthusiastically. So glad you could make it. Have you met our interdimensional visitor? Cousin Lumpy fixed Bellatrix with a gaze that seemed to see through her. A witch from another world, he said in a voice like gravel being crushed. How delightfully disruptive to the cosmic balance. Yes, Bellatrix replied, finding herself oddly wrong-footed by the direct assessment. You carry much darkness, Lumpy continued, still staring at her with those unsettling eyes. But it's not your darkness, is it? You've borrowed it from another. Bellatrix bristled. I serve the Dark Lord by choice. Choice. Such an interesting concept. Lumpy's face stretched into what might have been a smile. I've lived 947 years, and I'm still not convinced it exists. With that cryptic statement, he shuffled away toward the refreshment table, leaving Bellatrix momentarily speechless. Don't mind Cousin Lumpy, Gomez said cheerfully. He's been predicting the end of free will since the Crusades. Bit of a pessimist, really. Come, Morticia said, placing a cool hand gently on Bellatrix's arm. Let me introduce you to some of our other guests. I think you'll find their perspectives illuminating. Over the next hour, Bellatrix was led through a series of introductions that challenged every preconception she'd held about the boundaries between human and non-human, living and dead, natural and supernatural. She met a woman who could detach her head and place it on a serving platter, for special occasions, a man who transformed into a wolf not just at the full moon but whenever the mood strikes, and a pair of conjoined twins who finished each other's sentences while debating the ethical implications of splitting into two separate entities. The Aurors hovered nearby, clearly as bewildered by the gathering as Bellatrix was, though for different reasons. While they seemed disturbed by the monstrous aspects of the guests, Bellatrix found herself more unsettled by the casual acceptance, the sense of community, the absence of hierarchy or domination among these diverse beings. In her world, in the Dark Lord's vision, beings were classified, ranked, and valued according to their blood status and magical power. Those at the top dominated, those below served or perished. It was simple, logical, natural. Yet here was a gathering where a living corpse conversed as an equal with a woman who appeared fully human, where Cousin Itt's incomprehensible squeaking was listened to with the same respect as articulate speech, where difference was not just tolerated but celebrated. Overwhelming, isn't it? Morticia's voice came from beside her, somehow audible despite the noise of the gathering. Bellatrix turned to find the pale woman watching her with those penetrating dark eyes. "I don't know what you mean." "Community," Morticia said simply. "Belonging without condition. It can be quite disorienting when one is accustomed to hierarchies and power structures." Bellatrix felt exposed, as if Morticia had somehow read her thoughts. "You know nothing about me or what I'm accustomed to." "Perhaps not," Morticia conceded gracefully. "Though I've found that those who seek power most desperately are often those who have felt its absence most keenly." Before Bellatrix could form a suitably cutting response, a new commotion erupted near the entrance to the hall. Lurch appeared, looking even more grave than usual, and groaned something to Gomez. "What's that, old man? A disturbance in the cemetery?" Gomez's eyes lit up with excitement. "How marvelous! Just in time for after-dinner entertainment." The gathering shifted, guests moving en masse toward the large windows overlooking the family cemetery, a sprawling expanse of crooked tombstones and mausoleums visible in the moonlight. Bellatrix followed, curious despite herself, the Aurors close behind. Outside, the gravestones were moving. Shifting and trembling as if the earth beneath them was being disturbed from below. As they watched, the first skeletal hand burst through the soil, followed by another, and another, until the entire cemetery seemed alive with emerging corpses. A mass rising. Grandmama cackled with delight. "Haven't seen one of these since the equinox of '87. What's happening?" Auror Hopkins demanded, his voice higher than usual. "Are those, inferi?" "Just the ancestors stretching their legs," Gomez explained cheerfully. "They do this every few decades. Something about cosmic alignments and ley line disruptions. Fascinating metaphysical phenomenon. It's not unusual for dimensional rifts to disturb the dead," Morticia added calmly. "They're quite sensitive to fluctuations in the veil between worlds." Bellatrix stared in fascination as more and more skeletons emerged from their graves, some still wearing tattered remnants of burial clothes, others bare bone gleaming in the moonlight. Unlike inferi, which moved with mindless aggression, these seemed to possess a kind of awareness, greeting each other with skeletal waves and gathering in what appeared to be family groups. "Shouldn't we do something about this?" Proudfoot asked, wand held tightly in his hand. "Of course." Gomez agreed enthusiastically. "Lurch, break out the good whiskey. If the ancestors are joining the party, we need to show proper hospitality." To Bellatrix's astonishment, Lurch nodded and shuffled off, returning moments later with bottles of amber liquid and additional glasses. Meanwhile, Morticia had opened the French doors leading to the garden, allowing the skeletal guests to approach the mansion. "Great-grandfather Addams." Gomez greeted a particularly ancient skeleton wearing the remains of what might have been a Revolutionary War uniform. "How splendid to see you vertical again. You remember my wife, Morticia?" The skeleton made a creaking bow toward Morticia, who curtsied gracefully in return. "Charmed, as always," she murmured. "Your femur is looking particularly well preserved this century." The Aurors had backed against the far wall, clearly torn between their duty to monitor Bellatrix and their desire to flee from the advancing undead. Bellatrix herself remained by the window, watching with a mixture of fascination and disbelief as the Addams family welcomed their skeletal ancestors as naturally as if they were distant relatives arriving for Christmas dinner. Wednesday appeared at her elbow, her expression as solemn as ever. "The dimensional disturbance is stronger than we thought," she observed. Usually only the more recent dead rise during these events. In my world, Bellatrix found herself explaining, we have creatures called inferi, corpses reanimated through dark magic to serve a wizard's will. But these seem self-directed. Wednesday finished for her. The Addams dead retain their personalities. Great Aunt Crucible over there, she pointed to a skeleton in Victorian dress examining a modern lamp with apparent curiosity, was an inventor. She's always fascinated by technological advancements she missed while dormant. As the living and dead mingled, the party took on an even more surreal quality. Skeletons danced with living guests, clinked glasses and toasts, and engaged in conversations through a complicated system of gestures and bone-clicking that the Addams family seemed to understand perfectly. Miss Lestrange, Morticia approached, accompanied by a skeleton wearing the tattered remains of what appeared to be medieval clothing. I'd like to introduce you to my ancestor, Goody Addams. She was burned as a witch in 1437. The skeleton tilted her skull in acknowledgement. A real witch? Bellatrix asked, momentarily forgetting her usual hauteur in the face of this historical curiosity. Not in the way you are, Morticia explained. But she had certain gifts, particularly in herbalism and communion with the dead. The local villagers found her abilities unsettling. The skeleton made a series of rapid clicking sounds with her jaw and finger bones. She says she recognizes something in you, Morticia translated. A similar fire. Before Bellatrix could respond, a thunderous crack split the air, and the ground beneath the mansion trembled. Glasses fell from tables, smashing on the floor. The candles flickered wildly, some extinguishing and plunging portions of the room into darkness. How exciting! Gomez exclaimed. Earthquake. Dimensional collapse. Spontaneous manifestation of the netherworld. Another violent tremor shook the building, this one strong enough to send several guests, both living and skeletal, stumbling to the floor. Something's coming through, Grandmama announced, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by unusual seriousness. Something big. Coming through? Bellatrix demanded. From where? From the space between worlds, Morticia explained, helping a fallen skeleton reassemble itself with practiced ease. The dimensional rift that brought you here, it's expanding. The Aurors had finally overcome their fear of the undead enough to approach Bellatrix again. Is this your doing? Proudfoot demanded. Some kind of summoning spell to help you escape. Don't be absurd, Bellatrix snapped. If I could control dimensional rifts, I wouldn't still be here with you idiots. Another tremor, stronger than before, sent cracks racing across the floor of the grand hall. From these cracks emerged a strange, glowing mist that writhed like something alive. Fascinating, Wednesday commented, kneeling to examine the phenomenon more closely. Interdimensional plasma with quasi-sentient properties. Wednesday, darling, perhaps observe from a safer distance. Morticia suggested, though her voice held more scientific curiosity than maternal concern. The mist continued to pour from the cracks, taking on more definite form as it spread, tendrils that reached out with deliberate purpose, probing the room and its occupants. When one such tendril approached a nearby skeleton, the bones instantly crumbled to dust. How rude, Morticia observed with mild disapproval. That was Cousin Atropos. She was particularly looking forward to seeing how hats had evolved since her time. The undead guests began a hasty retreat back toward the cemetery, clearly recognizing the new presence as a threat even to their posthumous existence. The living guests, too, were backing away from the advancing mist, which had now formed a swirling vortex in the center of the hall. I believe, Grandmama announced, we may have inadvertently created a gateway for the dwellers in the void. Interdimensional parasites that feed on life force, magical energy, and social anxiety. Dwellers in the void? Hopkins repeated, his voice cracking. What the bloody hell is that? Think of them as cosmic vacuum cleaners with malevolent consciousness, Gomez explained helpfully. They suck up everything in their path and leave nothing but existential emptiness behind. Fascinating creatures, really, though their table manners leave something to be desired. The vortex was expanding rapidly, its edges now brushing against furniture, which disintegrated at contact. The temperature in the room dropped precipitously, frost forming on the windows despite the summer night outside. Bellatrix raised her wand, instinctively preparing to defend herself. How do we stop it? Conventional magic may not be effective against interdimensional entities, Morticia cautioned. They exist partially outside our reality, which makes them resistant to forces that operate within normal physical laws. So what do we do? Proudfoot demanded, his earlier animosity toward Bellatrix temporarily forgotten in the face of this larger threat. We need to close the rift, Grandmama stated. Seal it before more of them come through. And how exactly do we do that? Bellatrix asked, backing away as a tendril of mist reached toward her. Where it touched the floor, the ancient wood blackened and crumbled. I need components, Grandmama said decisively. From my laboratory. And she looked directly at Bellatrix, a sample of your magic. You're the connection to the other dimension, your magical signature is the key to closing the doorway. The Aurors immediately looked suspicious. This could be a trick, Savage warned. To get access to her magic for some other purpose. Young man, Grandmama fixed him with a withering glare, I am 300 years old and have witnessed the fall of empires. I have no interest in your interdimensional political squabbles. What I do have interest in is preventing my home from being consumed by void parasites, along with this entire dimensional plane. Another violent tremor rocked the mansion. The vortex expanded suddenly, engulfing a nearby table and two unfortunate guests who hadn't retreated quickly enough, the lizard man and his companion. Their screams cut off abruptly as they were reduced to empty husks, collapsing lifelessly to the floor. I vote we trust the 300-year-old witch, Hopkins said shakily. She's not a witch, Proudfoot began, then looked at the advancing vortex and apparently decided this wasn't the time for technical distinctions. Fine. But we monitor everything. Splendid. Gomez declared. Nothing like impending cosmic doom to foster cooperation. To the laboratory. The journey to Grandmama's laboratory was fraught with danger, as the mansion itself seemed to be breaking down around them. Cracks appeared in walls, spreading like spiderwebs. Ordinary objects began to behave strangely, a grandfather clock chimed 13 times, then melted, a painting of an ancestor suddenly depicted a howling void rather than a stern-faced Addams. The barriers between realities are thinning, Morticia explained as they hurried down a twisting staircase that seemed longer than it had been the previous day. Objects with history are particularly susceptible to the bleed-through effect. In the laboratory, Grandmama moved with surprising speed for her apparent age, gathering ingredients and tools with practiced efficiency. Powdered nightshade, essence of belladonna, a pinch of grave dust from 7 different centuries. What do you need from me? Bellatrix asked, watching as the old woman combined the ingredients in a cauldron that bubbled with an unnatural purple light. A focus for your magical energy, Grandmama replied without looking up from her work. Something personal that carries your magical signature strongly. Bellatrix hesitated. The most personal item she possessed was her wand, but surrendering it, even temporarily, went against every instinct she had. Especially with the Aurors watching. You can hold on to it, Morticia assured her, seeming to understand her reluctance. We just need you to channel your magic through it in a specific way. Another tremor shook the laboratory, more violent than before. Bottles fell from shelves, shattering and releasing contents that hissed, smoked, or, in one disturbing case, screamed. Time is rather of the essence, Morticia added calmly, though there was a new tension in her voice. The entity upstairs is only the precursor. If the rift continues to widen. Fine, Bellatrix decided. Tell me what to do. Grandmama quickly explained the process, a complex channeling of magical energy that would require Bellatrix to cast a specific sequence of spells, timing them precisely with the addition of ingredients to the cauldron. The Aurors would need to contribute as well, adding their magical signatures to help stabilize the rift. It's rather like baking a souffle while juggling flaming swords, Gomez commented cheerfully. Timing is everything, and the consequences of failure are spectacularly catastrophic. Not helping, darling, Morticia murmured. They worked quickly, following Grandmama's precise instructions. Bellatrix found herself in the unfamiliar position of cooperating with Aurors, their wands moving in coordination with hers, their incantations harmonizing with her own. It was oddly, not unpleasant. There was a rhythm to complex spellwork that transcended individual differences, a flow state that reminded her of dueling at its highest level. Now! Grandmama called as the cauldron's contents turned a blinding white. All together, channel through the center. Bellatrix and the three Aurors pointed their wands at the cauldron, releasing controlled streams of magical energy that met in the center of the bubbling concoction. The resulting reaction was immediate and dramatic, a pillar of light shot upward, passing straight through the ceiling toward the rift above. Did it work? Hopkins asked after several tense seconds of silence. His answer came in the form of an unearthly howl from upstairs, a sound of rage and frustration that made the hair on the back of Bellatrix's neck stand on end. It's fighting the closure, Morticia observed. We need more power. I'll get the children, Gomez volunteered, dashing toward the stairs. Wednesday's been practicing that ritual from the ancient Sumerian text, the one that temporarily channels ancestral energy. Excellent idea, Morticia approved. And ask Fester to bring his electrical collection. We may need an additional power source. Bellatrix maintained her position, wand still directed at the cauldron, which was now shaking violently. The magical drain was intense, she could feel her energy being siphoned at an alarming rate, feeding whatever process was attempting to seal the rift. I can't hold this much longer, she admitted through gritted teeth. Nor can we, Proudfoot acknowledged, his face strained with effort. You must, Grandmama insisted. Until the children arrive with reinforcements, you four are the only things standing between this dimension and complete collapse. Above them, the howling intensified, accompanied by a series of crashes that suggested the entity was not going quietly. It's breaking through the countermeasures, Morticia said, her usual calm finally showing cracks. We need to accelerate the process. She turned to Bellatrix, dark eyes intense. Miss Lestrange, I need to ask something difficult of you. The rift responds to emotional energy as well as magical. Strong emotions, particularly those tied to identity and purpose, can either strengthen or weaken interdimensional boundaries. What are you suggesting? Bellatrix demanded, struggling to maintain her magic flow while conversing. I need you to channel your darkness, your true darkness, not the borrowed kind, into the spell. The part of you that exists beneath your service to your Dark Lord. I don't know what you're talking about, Bellatrix snapped, though something inside her flinched at Morticia's words. I think you do, Morticia countered gently. I saw it in the conservatory, when you touched the midnight thorn. I see it now, fighting to be acknowledged. Another crash from above, louder than before. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. We don't have time for therapy sessions, Proudfoot interjected. Whatever you're going to do it now. Bellatrix hesitated, torn between her instinctive rejection of Morticia's words and the undeniable reality of the dimensional threat above them. If the rift continued to expand, she would never make it back to her world, never return to the Dark Lord's service. And yet, something in Morticia's steady gaze made her wonder, what was her true darkness? Was there something within her that even she had refused to acknowledge? Before she could resolve this internal conflict, the laboratory door burst open, and Wednesday, Pugsley, and Fester rushed in, carrying an assortment of bizarre items. Fester's arms were laden with what appeared to be car batteries and odd metallic contraptions. The children carried ancient-looking books and what might have been human bones. We brought the good stuff, Pugsley announced excitedly. The batteries from the electric chair, Grandpa's lightning collection, and Wednesday found that necronomical focus she's been saving for a special occasion. Excellent timing, Morticia approved. Set up the amplification circle around the cauldron. We'll need to integrate your energy with the existing magical flow. What followed was a chaotic but strangely coordinated sequence of events. Fester connected his electrical devices to form a circuit around the cauldron. Wednesday and Pugsley laid out bones in a precise pattern, then began a low, rhythmic chant in what sounded like ancient Sumerian. The house shook continuously now, the entity above clearly fighting against its impending banishment. "Everyone, prepare for the final surge," Grandmama instructed. "On my mark, channel everything you have into the center. Miss Lestrange, you'll need to lead, your connection to the other dimension makes you the primary conduit." Bellatrix nodded, gathering her remaining strength. Despite the circumstances, she felt a strange exhilaration. This was magic unlike anything she'd experienced before, raw, primal, unconcerned with the political distinctions of her world. Not dark or light, but simply power in its purest form. "Now!" Grandmama shouted as Fester threw a switch on his contraption. Electricity surged through the circuit, blue arcs jumping between connection points. The children's chant rose to a crescendo. The Aurors, following Bellatrix's lead, poured their remaining magical energy into the cauldron. For Bellatrix, time seemed to slow. In that suspended moment, with power flowing through and around her, she experienced a strange clarity. Images flashed through her mind, her childhood, her time at Hogwarts, her initiation into the Death Eaters, Azkaban, her escape, her devotion to the Dark Lord. But beneath these memories ran a darker current, not the darkness of cruelty or hatred, but something deeper and more fundamental. A darkness like the one she'd sensed in Morticia, ancient, knowing, accepting of all aspects of existence. Without fully understanding why, she surrendered to this deeper current, allowing it to flow through her and into the spell. Her magic changed, becoming less focused on destruction and more on transformation, not ending existence, but changing its form. Above them, the entity's howl changed pitch, shifting from rage to something like fear. The tremors intensified briefly, then began to subside. A shock wave of energy pulsed outward from the cauldron, knocking everyone except Bellatrix off their feet. Then, abruptly, silence fell. Did it work? Hopkins asked for the second time, picking himself up from the floor. "Let's find out," Gomez suggested, helping Morticia to her feet with gentlemanly concern. "Is everyone intact? No interdimensional mutations or spontaneous existence failure?" A quick check confirmed that all present were indeed still existing in their proper forms. They made their way cautiously upstairs, prepared for possible continuing danger. What they found in the grand hall was a scene of beautiful destruction. The vortex was gone, but it had left its mark. The floor where it had appeared was transformed into a perfect circle of what appeared to be obsidian glass, reflective as a mirror but somehow deeper, as if it contained infinite space within its surface. The air smelled of ozone and something older, like the space between stars. The remaining guests, those who hadn't fled or been consumed, were emerging cautiously from their hiding places. Cousin Itt poked his hairy head out from beneath an overturned table, squeaking inquiringly. "Yes, the crisis appears to be over," Morticia responded to whatever he'd asked. "Though I'm afraid the party has been somewhat disrupted." "Nonsense," Gomez declared. "This is exactly the sort of unexpected excitement that makes an Addams gathering memorable. We haven't had a dimensional incursion at a family event since Great-Uncle Agonizing's wedding to the swamp witch in 1897. As the Addams family set about restoring order with remarkable composure, Lurch sweeping up debris, Grandmama examining the obsidian circle with professional interest, the children collecting samples of residual interdimensional matter, for future experiments, Bellatrix found herself standing apart, watching with new eyes. These people had just faced potential dimensional collapse with the same equanimity they brought to breakfast. They'd coordinated a complex magical countermeasure involving elements from multiple traditions. And they'd trusted her, a self-proclaimed torturer and killer, to play a crucial role in saving not just themselves but their entire reality. "You did well," Morticia's voice came from beside her, the tall woman appearing as silently as always. "I didn't have much choice," Bellatrix replied, though without her usual bite. "There's always a choice," Morticia countered gently. "You could have used the chaos to attempt escape. Or tried to harness the entity's power for your own purposes. Many dark practitioners would have." Bellatrix didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the obsidian circle in the floor. Within its depths, she could almost see shapes moving, shadows within shadows, darkness flowing like liquid. "What did you mean," she finally asked, "about my true darkness?" Morticia smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. "Walk with me in the garden. The night air might be refreshing after our interdimensional adventure." Against her better judgment, Bellatrix followed, aware of the Aurors watching but somehow less concerned about them than before. The shared experience of fighting the entity had changed something in their dynamic, not friendship, certainly, but a grudging mutual recognition. The Addams garden at night was a place of strange beauty. Moonlight silvered the twisted trees and peculiar statuary. Nightshade and belladonna bloomed, their poisonous flowers luminous in the darkness. The family cemetery beyond the formal garden was now quiet again, the skeletal ancestors having returned to their rest after the excitement. "The darkness most people fear," Morticia began as they walked a winding path between deadly flora, "is merely the absence of light, the unknown, the hidden, the mysterious. They fear it because they don't understand it." She paused beside a particularly beautiful black orchid, its petals gleaming like wet ink in the moonlight. "But there is an older darkness, the darkness that existed before light, that cradles the universe in its embrace. Not empty, but full. Not cruel, but simply, complete." "You sound like a philosopher, not a dark witch," Bellatrix observed, though without mockery. "Perhaps the best witches are philosophers," Morticia replied with a slight smile. "We who embrace the shadow side of existence must understand it deeply, or risk being consumed by it." They walked in silence for a moment before Morticia continued. "When I look at you, Miss Lestrange, I see someone who has mistaken cruelty for darkness. Who has embraced pain as a substitute for power. Your Dark Lord has taught you to use darkness as a weapon, but never to understand it as a home." Bellatrix wanted to be angry at these words, to defend her devotion to the Dark Lord and his cause. But something in Morticia's calm certainty made it difficult to summon her usual righteous fury. "The Dark Lord is power," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "He will remake the world according to the natural order." "And what is natural about hatred?" Morticia asked simply. "What is powerful about fear? True darkness doesn't need to destroy to assert itself. It simply is, eternal and patient." She gestured toward the night sky, where stars glittered between scattered clouds. "The cosmos is mostly darkness, you know. Light is the exception, the beautiful but temporary interruption. We are born from darkness, return to darkness, and carry darkness within us always." Despite herself, Bellatrix found these words resonating with something deep inside her, something that had been buried beneath layers of dogma, trauma, and blind devotion. "When you channeled your magic during the ritual," Morticia continued, "I saw it change. For a moment, you touched that deeper darkness, the kind that creates rather than destroys, that transforms rather than erases. Your true power, not borrowed from your master but inherent in your being." "You're trying to turn me against the Dark Lord," Bellatrix accused, though without heat. Morticia looked genuinely surprised. "Not at all. Your choices are your own. I'm merely offering a perspective, one from a family that has embraced darkness for generations without losing itself to cruelty." They had reached a small clearing dominated by a twisted oak tree, its branches creating a canopy that blocked much of the moonlight. In the deep shadow beneath the tree, Morticia turned to face Bellatrix directly. "The Addams family has always understood that to truly embrace darkness, one must first embrace oneself, completely, without reservation or judgment. We love the macabre, the strange, the deadly not because they give us power over others, but because they are part of the glorious tapestry of existence." She reached out, gently touching the obsidian choker around Bellatrix's neck. Great Aunt Lavinia wore this to her husband's execution not out of cruelty, but out of respect for the completion of his life cycle. She wept as they beheaded him, then collected his skull to place in an honored position on her mantle. She loved him in death as she had in life. Bellatrix found herself speechless, caught between her ingrained ideologies and the undeniable wisdom in Morticia's words. This strange, pale woman spoke of darkness with more authentic understanding than many who claimed to be its masters. I should return to the house, she said finally, uncomfortable with the direction of her thoughts. The Aurors will be looking for me. Morticia nodded, seemingly unsurprised by the sudden end to their conversation. Of course. But remember, Miss Lestrange, the portal that will return you to your world reopens tomorrow night. Before then, I hope you'll take time to consider what kind of darkness you truly wish to serve. As they walked back toward the mansion, now glowing with candlelight against the night sky, Bellatrix found herself uncharacteristically introspective. The past 2 days in this strange household had unsettled certainties she'd held for decades. The Addamses, with their bizarre yet strangely harmonious existence, represented a different path than any she'd been shown before, neither the rigid pureblood traditions of her family nor the domination-focused ideology of the Death Eaters. They embraced death, darkness, and the macabre, yet did so with love rather than hatred. They found beauty in what others feared without needing to weaponize it against the world. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Bellatrix Lestrange found herself questioning not just her methods, but her understanding of darkness itself. And as the mansion loomed before them, windows glowing with welcoming golden light despite the destruction that had occurred within, a strange thought occurred to her: perhaps true darkness wasn't what she had been taught at all. Perhaps true darkness was something both more terrible and more wonderful than she had ever imagined. Chapter 3: What Darkness Hides. Bellatrix woke before dawn on what would be her final day in the Addams mansion. The portal would reopen tonight, according to Grandmama's calculations. Just a few more hours in this bizarre household, and she could return to her world, to the Dark Lord's service, to the life that had defined her for so long. So why did the thought fill her with such strange unease? She sat up in the ancient bed, running a hand through her wild hair. The events of the previous night still echoed in her mind: the interdimensional entity, the combined magic required to banish it, and most disturbingly, Morticia's words in the garden afterward. True darkness doesn't need to destroy to assert itself. It simply is, eternal and patient. Nonsense, of course. Philosophical drivel from a woman who played at darkness without understanding true power. And yet, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "What?" she called, instinctively reaching for her wand. The door creaked open to reveal Wednesday, already dressed in her usual black dress with white collar, braids perfectly arranged despite the early hour. "Good morning," the girl said flatly. "Mother asked me to inform you that breakfast will be served at 8. Also, I have a question about magical theory that couldn't wait." Without waiting for permission, Wednesday entered the room and perched on the edge of a chair, fixing Bellatrix with her intense, unblinking stare. "Last night, during the dimensional crisis, your magic changed," she said bluntly. "I was monitoring the thaumaturgical wavelengths as part of my ongoing research into interdimensional phenomena. Your initial magical signature showed distinct patterns of destruction and domination, fairly standard for most combat-oriented practitioners. But during the final binding sequence, it shifted to something more transformative." Bellatrix stared at the child. "You're what, 10 years old?" 12, Wednesday corrected without emotion. "Age is irrelevant to intellectual capacity. My question is, was that shift intentional, or an instinctive response to the dimensional pressures?" Despite herself, Bellatrix was intrigued by the girl's analytical approach. No child in her world would dare speak to her this way, with neither fear nor deference, just straightforward intellectual curiosity. "I'm not sure," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I felt something change in the moment, but it wasn't a conscious decision." Wednesday nodded as if this confirmed a hypothesis. "Interesting. Most practitioners are constrained by their training and ideological framework. Under sufficient pressure, however, innate magical nature can sometimes override conditioned responses. Are you suggesting my innate magical nature isn't what I've spent decades perfecting? Bellatrix asked, a dangerous edge entering her voice. Wednesday seemed utterly unfazed by the implied threat. Possibly. Or perhaps you've been perfecting only one aspect of your potential. She stood abruptly. Thank you for the data point. I'll add it to my research on magical identity versus magical expression. Pugsley and I are conducting experiments in the basement before breakfast if you'd like to observe. We're testing whether certain emotional states enhance pyrokinetic results. With that, she departed as suddenly as she'd arrived, leaving Bellatrix both annoyed and oddly unsettled. The girl had a disconcerting way of cutting through pretense to uncomfortable truths, a trait she shared with her mother. Deciding that sleep was now impossible, Bellatrix dressed and made her way downstairs. The mansion was quieter than usual at this early hour, though strange sounds still emanated from various rooms, what might have been chains rattling, something heavy being dragged across a floor, and a distant, mournful howl that could have been whined through the eaves or something far less natural. She found her way to the conservatory, drawn back to Morticia's deadly garden. In the pale light of dawn, the plants looked even more otherworldly, dew glistening on venomous thorns, carnivorous blooms partially closed in sleep but still visibly pulsing with life. They're most honest at dawn, Morticia's voice came from the shadows, causing Bellatrix to spin around, wand raised. Before they've prepared their daytime faces. Morticia emerged from between two massive, twisted trees, a pair of silver pruning shears in her elegant hands. Despite the early hour, she was immaculately dressed in her usual form-fitting black gown, not a hair out of place. Do you ever sleep? Bellatrix demanded, lowering her wand slightly. When it suits me, Morticia replied with the ghost of a smile. But dawn is the best time for certain gardening tasks. The deadly nightshade prefers to be pruned while still drowsy, makes it less likely to release its toxins in protest. She approached a particularly lush plant with delicate purple flowers, and began carefully trimming away selected stems. Bellatrix watched, noticing how the plant seemed to lean toward Morticia's touch rather than away from it, despite the cutting. Your daughter was just interrogating me about magical theory, Bellatrix said after a moment. Wednesday has a questing mind, Morticia replied without looking up from her work. We encourage her academic pursuits, even when they involve occasional violations of conventional ethics or local ordinances. She's unusual for a child her age. All children are unusual when allowed to be their authentic selves, Morticia observed, moving to the next plant, a grotesque specimen with what appeared to be fangs along the edges of its leaves. It's only when we force them into predetermined molds that they become ordinary. Bellatrix thought of her own childhood, the rigid expectations of the black family, the constant pressure to uphold pure-blood traditions, to be worthy of the family name. She'd never been allowed to simply be, there was always a standard to meet, always someone else's vision to fulfill. Your family is nothing like mine, she found herself saying. Perhaps not on the surface, Morticia agreed, carefully avoiding a spray of venom as she trimmed a particularly aggressive vine. Though I suspect there are similarities beneath. Old families often share certain qualities, regardless of their specific philosophies. My family values blood purity above all else, Bellatrix stated, expecting disagreement. The Addams family has always valued bloodlines as well, Morticia surprised her by saying. Though for us, it's less about purity and more about potency. The strength of one's connection to the primal darkness from which we all emerge. She glanced at Bellatrix with those penetrating dark eyes. Your black blood runs strong with such connection, I saw it the moment you arrived. Bellatrix frowned, unsure how to respond to this assessment. It sounded like a compliment, yet contradicted everything she'd been taught about what made her bloodline superior. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lurch, who appeared at the conservatory entrance and let out his usual rumbling groan. Thank you, Lurch, Morticia responded as if to a clear statement. Please tell the children to wash their hands thoroughly after their pyrokinetic experiments. We don't want a repeat of last Tuesday's spontaneous tablecloth combustion. As Lurch departed, Bellatrix shook her head in bemusement. How do you understand him when he barely makes sounds? The same way I understand my plants, or the ancestral spirits, or the peculiar creaking this house makes just before it rains, Morticia replied. By listening not just with my ears, but with something deeper. She set down her pruning shears and turned fully toward Bellatrix. The same way I understand what troubles you this morning, though you haven't spoken it aloud. Bellatrix stiffened. Nothing troubles me except being trapped in this madhouse for another day. If you say so, Morticia agreed mildly, in a tone that suggested she believed otherwise. Though I wonder, if our home is truly so unbearable, why seek out my garden at dawn rather than remain in your room? The Aurors would certainly have preferred the latter, they're currently in quite a state trying to locate you. As if on cue, the sound of hurried footsteps and urgent voices could be heard from the main house. I needed air, Bellatrix said dismissively. Of course. Morticia picked up a black watering can and began tending to a row of plants whose leaves shivered in apparent anticipation. Air is essential for clarity of thought, particularly when one is approaching a crossroads. What crossroads? Bellatrix demanded, her patience wearing thin. Tonight the portal reopens, I return to my world, and we never see each other again. There's no decision to be made. Morticia continued watering, her movements graceful and precise. Every moment offers choices, Miss Lestrange. Even choosing to follow the path you've always walked is still a choice, one made more significant when you've glimpsed an alternative. Before Bellatrix could form a suitably cutting response, the Aurors burst into the conservatory, wands raised and expressions alarmed. There you are. Proudfoot exclaimed, looking relieved and angry in equal measure. You can't just wander off without notification. I'm not a child needing supervision, Bellatrix sneered, though her heart wasn't fully in it. After facing an interdimensional entity together the previous night, the adversarial dynamic felt somewhat performative. You're a prisoner, Savage reminded her, though he lowered his wand slightly. One who's caused enough trouble already. Guest, Morticia corrected automatically, setting down her watering can. And one who has been nothing but cooperative since that minor crucio incident upon arrival. Hardly worth mentioning, really. Hopkins stifled what might have been a laugh, earning a glare from Proudfoot. Gentlemen, I was just about to invite Miss Lestrange to join me for breakfast, Morticia continued smoothly. You're welcome to accompany us, of course. The mention of food caused Hopkins to look distinctly queasy. Is your grandmother cooking again? No, I believe Lurch is preparing the morning meal today, Morticia assured him. His vulture egg omelets are really quite delightful, just the right balance of gaminess and slime. The walk back to the main house revealed the aftermath of the previous night's dimensional incursion. Cracks still zigzagged across some walls, though they no longer glowed with otherworldly light. Several windows had shattered, and portraits hung askew, their subjects looking somewhat more disturbed than usual, which, given the already disturbing nature of Addams' ancestors, was quite an achievement. In the grand hall, the obsidian circle remained in the floor, its mirror-like surface reflecting nothing visible in the room, but rather showing what appeared to be shifting shadows and occasional flickers of strange light. We've decided to keep it, Gomez announced cheerfully, noticing Bellatrix studying the phenomenon. Makes a splendid conversation piece. And Wednesday says it occasionally whispers existential truths at precisely 3:17 a.m. It's a thin section of the dimensional barrier, Hopkins pointed out, looking concerned. Shouldn't it be? I don't know, sealed or something. Probably, Gomez agreed with undiminished enthusiasm. But where's the adventure in that? Besides, Grandmama says it's stable for now, only about a 17% chance of expanding to consume the entire household. He clapped Hopkins on the shoulder. Those are excellent odds by Addams standards. Breakfast was a chaotic affair, with the entire family present plus guests. Fester was demonstrating to an enthralled Pugsley how to generate electricity between his fingertips. Wednesday was feeding something that looked suspiciously like raw hamburger to a plant she'd brought from the conservatory, which consumed the offering with audible smacking sounds. Grandmama was arguing with Cousin Itt about the proper pronunciation of an ancient Sumerian incantation, while Morticia and Gomez exchanged loving glances across the table, occasionally lapsing into French or Spanish endearments. The Aurors ate cautiously, now seemingly resigned to the strangeness of their temporary home. Bellatrix found herself observing the family dynamics with unexpected interest. There was genuine affection here, evident in every interaction: Gomez's adoration of Morticia, the parents' pride in their strange children, the extended family's easy camaraderie. Even their most macabre conversations were underpinned by warmth. It was so different from her own family's cold formality, or the fear-based hierarchy of the Death Eaters. The Addamses embraced darkness, yes, but without the cruelty or domination she had always associated with power. "Miss Lestrange," Gomez addressed her suddenly, "since this is your final day with us, we've planned a proper Addams farewell for this evening. Music, dancing, perhaps a séance if the spirits are amenable." "Is that really appropriate?" Proudfoot interjected. "She's being returned to custody, not going on holiday. All the more reason for a memorable send-off." Gomez insisted. "The best parties always happen at the edge of doom. Just ask Cousin Crimp about his last night before the guillotine, still talks about it whenever we summon his spirit." "That's very thoughtful," Bellatrix replied, genuinely unsure how to respond to such bizarre generosity. "It's our pleasure," Morticia assured her. "The children are particularly looking forward to it. Wednesday rarely shows enthusiasm for social gatherings, but she's quite invested in your farewell celebration." Bellatrix glanced at Wednesday, who was now taking notes as her plant appeared to be having some kind of allergic reaction to the meat, developing large, pulsating boils. "Delightful," she muttered, wondering what enthusiasm from Wednesday might entail. Probably something involving poisonous substances or the summoning of malevolent entities. After breakfast, the day took on a strange, anticipatory quality. The knowledge that the portal would reopen at midnight created a countdown atmosphere, with family members occasionally making cryptic references to preparations needed for the crossing. Bellatrix found herself at loose ends, unwilling to admit her reluctance to return to her room alone with her increasingly conflicted thoughts. Instead, she wandered the mansion, exploring rooms she hadn't yet seen, a music room containing instruments that appeared designed to cause pain rather than create melody, a trophy room filled with mounted heads of creatures that shouldn't exist, a small theater where puppets that looked disturbingly like tiny corpses hung from the ceiling. In what appeared to be Gomez's study, she discovered the master of the house engaged in an unusual activity, fencing with an invisible opponent, leaping over furniture and lunging dramatically while carrying on a one-sided conversation. "Aha! You thought you had me, but the Addams reflexes are legendary," he exclaimed, parrying an attack only he could see. "What's that?" "No, I assure you, beheading is still considered poor form in modern fencing circles, though I admire your old-school approach." He spotted Bellatrix in the doorway and immediately brightened. "Miss Lestrange. Care to join me? I'm entertaining the ghost of the Marquis de Lafayette, terrible swordsman in life, but death has improved his technique considerably." "I'll pass," Bellatrix replied, though without the contempt such an absurd invitation would normally have inspired. After 3 days in this household, fencing with invisible ghosts seemed almost reasonable. "Another time, perhaps," Gomez said cheerfully, returning to his bout. "Though I should warn you, Wednesdays are when we practice with the poison tips. Adds that extra incentive to parry correctly." Continuing her exploration, Bellatrix eventually found herself in what appeared to be the family library, a vast, gloomy space lined with ancient tomes bound in materials that included leather, wood, stone, and in one disturbing case, what appeared to be human skin. Unlike the chaotic study, this room held a sense of reverent quiet, broken only by the occasional rustling from shelves that seemed to move of their own accord. Surprisingly, she found Pugsley there, his round face screwed up in concentration as he carefully turned the pages of an enormous book. "What are you reading?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her usual disdain for children. Pugsley looked up, his face brightening. Ancient Egyptian burial curses. I'm researching for a school project on creative uses of internal organs. Did you know they pulled the brain out through the nose? I tried it on a dead squirrel, but the skull kept cracking. I think I need a thinner hook. Despite herself, Bellatrix was impressed by the boy's ghoulish enthusiasm. You need to soften the bone first, she found herself advising. In the Black family libraries, there are texts on preservation spells that make extraction easier. Pugsley's eyes widened with excitement. Really? Can you show me? I mean, not the magic since I can't do that yet, but the technique? For the next half hour, to her own surprise, Bellatrix found herself seated beside the boy, describing ancient preservation methods used by dark wizards throughout history. Pugsley proved an attentive student, asking intelligent questions and taking detailed notes in a notebook already filled with disturbing anatomical drawings. You know a lot about dark stuff, he observed eventually. Is that because of your Dark Lord? The question was asked with simple curiosity, no judgment or fear, so unlike how children in her world would approach the topic. Some of it, she acknowledged. But much I learned from my family. The Blacks have practiced dark magic for generations. Like the Addamses. Pugsley nodded enthusiastically. Dad says our family has been weird since before weird was a word. Great-great-grandmother Slaughter Addams used to collect the tears of virgins to brew immortality potions. Never worked, though, she only lived to be 142. A respectable age nonetheless, Bellatrix commented, finding herself oddly comfortable in this strange conversation. Yeah, and her head kept talking for another 3 years after they buried her body, Pugsley added casually. They had to put it in a special box with air holes. Their macabre discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Thing, who scurried across the table and tapped urgently on Pugsley's notebook. What is it, Thing? The boy asked. The disembodied hand made a series of gestures that somehow conveyed clear meaning, at least to Pugsley. Grandmama needs help with the portal calculations. Cool. He jumped up, then turned to Bellatrix. Want to come? She's working out exactly when the dimensional gateway will open tonight. There's a 66% chance of success, and a 33% chance we all get sucked into the void between worlds and experience existential terror for eternity. He said this last bit with such enthusiasm that Bellatrix almost laughed. I think I'll continue exploring the library. Okay, but watch out for the books on the top shelf of the north wall, Pugsley warned as he departed. They get hungry around noon, and your hair looks like the kind of thing they'd enjoy eating. Alone in the library, Bellatrix found herself drawn to the ancient tomes. Many were in languages she couldn't read, some appeared to be written in scripts that predated known human civilizations. Others were in recognizable languages but covered subjects so esoteric or disturbing that even she, with her extensive knowledge of dark magic, found them challenging. One volume in particular caught her eye, a slender book bound in what appeared to be black velvet, with no title on its spine. When she removed it from the shelf, she found the cover adorned only with a simple silver emblem she didn't recognize, a crescent moon embracing a small star. Opening it revealed handwritten pages in an elegant script, the ink still vibrant despite the obvious age of the paper. It appeared to be a personal journal rather than a formal text, written in archaic but understandable English. I have at last understood the true nature of darkness, the first entry began. Not as the absence of light, as the philosophers claim, but as the primordial state from which all emerges and to which all returns. To embrace this darkness is not to reject life, but to accept it in its entirety, both its beauty and its terror. Bellatrix found herself sinking into a nearby chair, oddly compelled by these words written by an unknown hand centuries ago. As she read further, it became clear that the journal belonged to an Addams ancestor, a woman who had devoted her life to understanding what she called the sacred darkness. Those who fear the dark see only emptiness and threat, another passage read. But I have learned to see with different eyes. In darkness dwells possibility, mystery, the infinite potential from which creation springs. To walk willingly into darkness is not to surrender to chaos, but to recognize that order itself emerges from the formless void. The philosophy expressed in these pages echoed Morticia's words from their garden conversation, yet predated her by generations. This wasn't merely one woman's perspective, but a tradition passed down through the Addams line, a way of understanding darkness not as a weapon or a tool, but as a fundamental aspect of existence to be embraced rather than conquered. So absorbed was she in this unexpected discovery that Bellatrix failed to notice the presence behind her until a cool hand touched her shoulder. "I see you found Euphemia's journal," Morticia observed, her sudden appearance startling enough that Bellatrix nearly dropped the book. "One of our most insightful ancestors. She was burned as a witch in 1693, though the historical record suggests she found the experience spiritually illuminating right up until the end." Bellatrix closed the journal carefully. "Your family has an unusual relationship with death." "We prefer to think of it as a healthy perspective," Morticia replied, taking a seat in a chair opposite Bellatrix. "Death is neither enemy nor friend, but simply the other side of the coin we call life. To fear it is to live partially, to embrace it is to experience existence fully." "My master has sought to conquer death," Bellatrix said, not sure why she was sharing this closely guarded truth. "To transcend it through magical means." "Ah," Morticia nodded understanding. "A common ambition among those who misunderstand darkness. They see death as the ultimate darkness to be overcome, rather than a darkness to be entered willingly when the time comes." She leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes intent. "Tell me, Miss Lestrange, in his quest to evade death, has your Dark Lord truly lived? Has he experienced the exquisite pain of deep love, the sublime terror of beauty that stops the heart, the sweet agony of surrender to forces greater than himself?" The question struck Bellatrix with unexpected force. Had the Dark Lord ever expressed joy, or wonder, or love? In all her years of service, she had seen his rage, his determination, his cruel satisfaction in victory, but never the kind of passionate engagement with life that the Addamses displayed even in their most macabre moments. "His concerns are beyond such trivial matters," she replied automatically, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "Nothing is beyond the embrace of true darkness," Morticia countered gently. "It contains all experiences, all emotions, all possibilities. To reject any part of existence is to diminish the darkness, not to master it." She rose gracefully from her chair. "But philosophy can wait. I came to inform you that preparations for tonight's farewell gathering are underway. Grandmama has calculated that the portal will open at precisely midnight, though with a margin of error that could result in either premature dimensional collapse or a delay of up to 3 centuries. 3 centuries? Bellatrix repeated incredulously. Morticia's lips curved in a slight smile. "She's being conservative in her estimates." The children helped with the calculations, which always introduces an element of creative mathematics. As evening approached, the mansion took on a festive air despite, or perhaps because of, the lingering effects of the previous night's dimensional incursion. Black candles appeared in every room, their flames burning with unusual colors that cast eerie, shifting shadows. Music echoed through the halls. A haunting melody played on what sounded like a pipe organ crossed with some kind of stringed instrument, occasionally punctuated by what might have been screams. In her room, Bellatrix found another dress laid out on the bed, this one even more elegant than the one she'd worn to the previous gathering. Made of what appeared to be black silk but with an unusual iridescent quality that shifted like oil on water, it was cut in a style reminiscent of Victorian morning dress yet with a distinctly modern edge. Wednesday helped select it, Morticia explained from the doorway, where she'd appeared with her usual silent grace. She thought the embedded crow feathers in the collar were particularly suited to your aesthetic. Bellatrix ran a hand over the fabric, surprised by its quality. "Your family has shown me unexpected hospitality, considering what I am." "What you are is a guest in our home," Morticia replied simply. "Besides, the Addams family has always had a certain appreciation for those society labels as dangerous." A small smile touched her lips. It makes for more interesting dinner conversation. She glided into the room, carrying a small wooden box similar to the one Wednesday had brought the previous day. I thought you might appreciate these for tonight's gathering. They belong to my grandmother, a woman of particular spiritual intensity. Opening the box revealed a set of jewelry unlike anything Bellatrix had seen before, a necklace and matching earrings made of what appeared to be black diamonds set in silver so dark it was almost black itself. The stones caught the candlelight strangely, seeming to absorb rather than reflect it. Black diamonds? Bellatrix questioned, reaching out to touch one cautiously. Not exactly, Morticia replied. Grandmother called them tears of the void, crystallized fragments from a meteorite that fell during a particularly auspicious celestial alignment. They're said to enhance one's connection to the spaces between worlds, which might be helpful during tonight's crossing. Despite her usual suspicion of unfamiliar magical objects, Bellatrix found herself drawn to these strange gems. They emanated a subtle power she recognized instinctively, not dark magic as wizards classified it, but something older and more fundamental. Thank you, she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Morticia inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the rare gratitude. The gathering begins at 10. The Aurors have been informed and will, of course, be in attendance. Though I believe they've requested that Fester refrain from demonstrating his internal combustion trick this time. After Morticia departed, Bellatrix found herself lingering over the dress and jewelry, experiencing an unexpected anticipation for the evening ahead. It was absurd, of course. This wasn't a social occasion to be enjoyed, but merely a prelude to her return, to the Dark Lord, to her purpose, to the cause she had dedicated her life to. And yet, as she dressed for the gathering, she couldn't suppress a strange sense of, not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. As if she were leaving something unfinished, something important. By the time she descended to the grand hall at 10, the gathering was already in full swing. Unlike the previous night's party, this one appeared limited to the immediate Addams family plus Cousin Itt, whose hair looked particularly voluminous, possibly styled for the special occasion. The obsidian circle in the floor had been incorporated into the decor, surrounded by black candles and what appeared to be small offerings, strange flowers, crystals, and small bones arranged in patterns that Bellatrix recognized as having magical significance, though not of any tradition she was familiar with. Ah, our guest of honor! Gomez exclaimed upon seeing her, breaking away from an animated conversation with Fester to bound over. You look magnificent. The impending return to imprisonment agrees with you. I'm not returning to prison, Bellatrix corrected coldly. I'll escape these Aurors just as I escaped Azkaban. That's the spirit. Gomez approved enthusiastically. Nothing like a good escape plan to add zest to an evening. I myself have escaped from 17 prisons, 12 asylums, and one particularly persistent encyclopedia salesman who chained himself to our gate in 1987. The three Aurors stood near the refreshment table, looking distinctly uncomfortable in formal attire that Lurch had apparently provided. Their discomfort seemed evenly divided between the Addams family's strangeness and Bellatrix herself, resplendent in her borrowed finery and radiating dangerous intensity. Remember, Proudfoot muttered as she passed, when the portal opens, you're going through in magical restraints. No tricks. I wouldn't dream of it, Bellatrix replied with a smile that made him visibly nervous. The gathering progressed with the peculiar blend of formality and macabre enthusiasm that characterized all Addams' social events. Gomez and Morticia danced a passionate tango that somehow incorporated what appeared to be a ritual dagger, passing it back and forth between them with perfect timing and evident enjoyment. Wednesday and Pugsley demonstrated their latest invention, a device that generated miniature lightning bolts, which they aimed at a small cage containing what might have been frogs or possibly very small humans. Bellatrix decided not to look too closely. Grandmama circulated with a tray of hors d'oeuvres that occasionally moved of their own accord, while Fester entertained Cousin Itt with what appeared to be a demonstration of how many light bulbs he could fit in his mouth simultaneously. Throughout it all, Bellatrix found herself observing with a strange detachment, as if already separating herself from this bizarre interlude in her life. And yet, she couldn't help noticing details she might once have dismissed, the genuine affection underlying the family's macabre interactions, the way they celebrated rather than feared the strange and dark, their complete comfort with who and what they were. As midnight approached, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Lurch dimmed the lights until only the candles surrounding the obsidian circle illuminated the room. Grandmama took up position beside the circle, an ancient tome in her gnarled hands and an expression of rare seriousness on her face. "The alignment approaches," she announced, her voice taking on a resonant quality it usually lacked. "The veil between worlds grows thin once more." The Aurors moved closer to Bellatrix, their earlier discomfort now replaced by professional alertness. Proudfoot produced what appeared to be magical restraints, thin silver cords that would bind her magic as well as her physical movement. "Time to prepare for transport," he said firmly. Before Bellatrix could respond, whether with compliance or resistance, she hadn't fully decided, a low rumbling began beneath their feet. The obsidian circle in the floor began to shimmer, its surface rippling like disturbed water. "Fascinating," Wednesday observed, kneeling at the edge of the circle despite her parents' warnings to stay back. "The dimensional membrane is becoming permeable. If my calculations are correct, the portal should manifest in approximately 47 seconds. Or we could all be instantly vaporized," Pugsley added hopefully. "Either way, it's going to be awesome." The rumbling intensified. The air above the circle began to distort, twisting and folding in ways that hurt the eyes to observe directly. Sparks of strange energy, not quite electricity, not quite magic, crackled around the perimeter. "It's happening exactly as predicted," Grandmama cackled with evident pride in her calculations. "Though I will admit, I gave us about a 20% chance of catastrophic implosion." Bellatrix felt it then, a pull, a resonance with something beyond the visible disturbance. Her magic responded instinctively, reaching toward the forming portal like a plant seeking light. The strange gems in Morticia's grandmother's necklace grew warm against her skin, vibrating subtly in harmony with the energy emanating from the circle. "I feel it too," Morticia said softly from beside her, those dark eyes knowing. "The call of the spaces between worlds. It recognizes you as a traveler." The portal continued to form, the distortion resolving into a swirling vortex similar to the one that had brought Bellatrix to the Addams mansion, though more stable in its appearance. Through its shifting surface, vague shapes could be seen moving, another place, another reality coming into focus. Proudfoot stepped forward, restraints ready. "Lestrange, it's time." "Come quietly," and, whatever he'd been about to say was cut off as the portal suddenly pulsed, expanding explosively outward. A shock wave of energy knocked everyone back several feet, everyone except Bellatrix, who found herself rooted in place by some force she didn't understand, the void gems at her throat now burning hot. And through the expanded portal stepped three figures, not the misty interdimensional entities of the previous night, but human figures in dark robes, their faces hidden by silver masks. "Death Eaters." "My loyal servants," Bellatrix whispered, genuine shock in her voice. "How?" The lead Death Eater lowered his hood, revealing the pale, pointed face of Lucius Malfoy. "The Dark Lord sensed the dimensional disturbance," he explained, his voice carrying that familiar combination of aristocratic drawl and barely concealed fear. "He sent us to investigate and retrieve you, if possible." Bellatrix felt a surge of complicated emotions, pride that the Dark Lord had noticed her absence, relief at the sight of familiar allies, and something else, something she couldn't immediately identify. The Aurors had recovered from the shock wave and now stood with wands raised, facing the new threat. "Ministry Aurors," Proudfoot identified himself, his voice steady despite being outnumbered. "You're under arrest for, Crucio," shouted one of the masked Death Eaters, sending a jet of red light directly at Proudfoot. Unlike when Bellatrix had cast the same spell upon her arrival, this time the curse had its intended effect. Proudfoot collapsed, his body contorting in agony as he screamed. The other Aurors immediately returned fire, and the grand hall erupted into a chaotic duel, curses flying in all directions, furniture exploding, portraits shrieking in alarm. "Stop!" Morticia's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected authority. There are children present. To Bellatrix's astonishment, both the Death Eaters and Aurors hesitated, momentarily shocked by the calm command in the face of magical battle. In that brief pause, Morticia stepped forward, positioning herself between the combatants with serene confidence. "This is an Addams home," she stated, her voice carrying easily despite its softness. "Violence is certainly welcome when appropriate, but only with proper etiquette. If you insist on trying to kill each other, I must ask that you take it to the formal dueling space in the East Wing, where the bloodstains will complement the decor." Lucius looked utterly nonplussed by this strange woman addressing him as if he were a misbehaving dinner guest rather than a dangerous dark wizard. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Morticia Addams," she replied simply. "And you are uninvited guests who have interrupted what was meant to be a dignified farewell gathering." The absurdity of the situation might have been comical if not for the very real danger. Death Eaters were not known for their restraint, and Bellatrix knew what typically happened to Muggles who spoke to them with such casual authority. "Lucius," she interjected quickly, "these people have unusual abilities. They're immune to certain curses. I've been studying them." It was a hasty explanation, but not entirely untrue. The past 3 days had indeed been a study of sorts, though not the kind her fellow Death Eaters would understand. Lucius's pale eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Immune? How?" "It's complicated," Bellatrix replied. "But potentially valuable information for the Dark Lord." This invocation of their master's potential interest seemed to give Lucius pause. The other Death Eaters, taking their cue from him, lowered their wands slightly, though they remained alert. The temporary lull was broken by Wednesday, who had been observing the new arrivals with clinical interest. "Your masks are inefficient," she informed the Death Eaters matter-of-factly. "The eye openings are too large, compromising facial concealment. And the material appears to be standard silver alloy, which offers no protection against cursed projectiles or airborne toxins." Lucius stared at the solemn girl in apparent disbelief. "Is she mocking us?" "No, she's critiquing your equipment design from a practical perspective," Pugsley explained helpfully. "Wednesday's very interested in functional aesthetics for ceremonial murder cults. She wrote a paper on it for school last year. It received an A-, Wednesday added. Mrs. Shimmer said my section on efficient blood collection systems was disturbing but thorough." Bellatrix found herself in the bizarre position of trying not to laugh at the expression on Lucius's face, a mixture of outrage, confusion, and the dawning suspicion that he had stepped into a situation beyond his usual experience. The Aurors had used this exchange to regroup, helping Proudfoot to his feet and forming a defensive position. Hopkins addressed the Death Eaters with forced bravado. "You're outnumbered and in violation of multiple laws. Surrender now, and, oh, please," Lucius sneered, regaining his composure. 3 half-trained Aurors against 3 Death Eaters, with Bellatrix making a 4th. "The odds are hardly in your favor." "You're forgetting the Addamses," Gomez interjected cheerfully, twirling his mustache. "We may not have fancy wands, but we've survived plagues, inquisitions, and 3 separate IRS audits. We're remarkably difficult to kill, isn't that right, Fester?" "Absolutely." Fester agreed enthusiastically. "I've been struck by lightning 78 times, buried alive twice, and once dissolved completely in a vat of acid. Took weeks to resolidify, but it was worth it for the unique perspective." The Death Eaters exchanged glances, clearly unsure whether to take these bizarre claims seriously. Lucius turned to Bellatrix, seeking confirmation or explanation. "They're strange, but powerful in their way," she said, choosing her words carefully. "This isn't a battle worth fighting, Lucius. The portal is open, we should return to the Dark Lord immediately." It was the right argument to make, invoking their master's wishes above all else. Lucius hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well," he said, then addressed the Aurors with contemptuous formality. "Consider this a temporary reprieve. The next time we meet, you won't have the protection of, whatever these people are." Addams's, Morticia supplied helpfully. It's a very old family name. Perhaps you've heard of us in relation to various historical disasters or unexplained phenomena. Lucius ignored this, turning back to Bellatrix. The Dark Lord awaits. Are you coming? It should have been a simple question with an obvious answer. Of course she was coming. Returning to her master's side was all she had thought about since arriving in this strange place. And yet, Bellatrix found herself hesitating, glancing around at the Addams family, Morticia with her serene confidence, Gomez with his boundless enthusiasm, the children with their macabre brilliance, Fester with his childlike joy in destruction, Grandmama with her ancient wisdom, even Lurch with his silent loyalty. In just 3 days, they had shown her a different kind of darkness than any she had known before, a darkness that embraced rather than destroyed, that celebrated strangeness rather than punishing it, that found beauty in what others feared. Well? Lucius prompted, impatience and confusion in his voice. The portal won't remain stable for long. Bellatrix opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a new development interrupted the tense standoff. Thing, who had been observing from the relative safety of a nearby candlestick, suddenly scurried across the floor with alarming speed, grabbing something from one of the Death Eater's robes as he passed. What was that? The Death Eater exclaimed, spinning around in alarm. Just Thing, Gomez explained casually. Probably collecting fabric samples. He's been working on a scrapbook of textiles that have witnessed terror. Fascinating project, really. But Thing hadn't been collecting fabric. As he scurried back across the floor, Bellatrix saw what he held, a small silver object that gleamed in the candlelight. A time turner. The realization struck her immediately. The Dark Lord had provided his servants with a time turner to ensure their mission's success, a rare and powerful magical object that could help them escape if needed. And now the Addams's disembodied hand had stolen it. Stop that thing! Lucius shouted, apparently recognizing the theft. Too late. Thing reached Cousin Itt and handed him the time turner. Itt squeaked something unintelligible and immediately began manipulating the device with hair-covered hands. What's he doing? Hopkins demanded, looking as confused as the Death Eaters. Temporal mechanics, Wednesday explained calmly. Cousin Itt has 3 doctorates in theoretical physics. He's particularly interested in nonlinear time progression. The time turner in Itt's possession began to glow with unnatural brightness, spinning faster than Bellatrix had ever seen such a device move. The air around Itt shimmered with distortion similar to that surrounding the portal, but with a different quality, more controlled, more deliberate. He's altering the temporal matrix. Grandmama exclaimed, looking impressed. Combining the time turner's magic with the dimensional rift to create a causality loop. Brilliant. In English, please. Savage requested desperately. He's making time go funny, Pugsley translated helpfully. The effect spread rapidly. The Death Eaters found themselves moving in slow motion, their attempts to retrieve the time turner or attack Itt happening at a fraction of normal speed. The Aurors, too, seemed caught in the temporal distortion, though less severely. Only the Addamses appeared completely unaffected, moving normally through the chaotic scene as if immune to the time manipulation, perhaps another manifestation of their strange resistance to certain forms of magic. And Bellatrix, she found herself caught somewhere in between, able to move but feeling as if she were pushing through thick syrup, each motion requiring conscious effort. The void gems at her throat pulsed in rhythm with the time turner's glow, somehow protecting her from the worst of the effect. Itt squeaked rapidly, gesturing toward the portal with one hand while continuing to manipulate the time turner with the other. He says the temporal displacement will only last about 3 minutes in subjective time, Morticia translated. But that should be sufficient to make a decision about departure arrangements. She turned to Bellatrix, somehow appearing directly before her despite the thick molasses of time between them. The choice remains yours, Miss Lestrange. Your Dark Lord and his servants, or an alternative. What alternative? Bellatrix managed to ask, her voice sounding distant and echoing to her own ears. The Addamses have connections across many planes of existence, Morticia explained, her voice unaffected by the temporal distortion. Cousin Itt has used the time turner not just to slow your pursuers, but to open a secondary pathway through the portal, one that leads neither to your world as you left it, nor back to Azkaban prison. Where, then? Bellatrix demanded, struggling against the strange heaviness of time. To a place where you might explore what true darkness means, Morticia replied enigmatically. Not as a servant, but as a seeker of your own path. The offer was bewildering, unexpected. Bellatrix had never considered any path but the one that led back to the Dark Lord's side. To abandon that purpose, that identity. Why would you offer this? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. After everything I've told you about myself, about what I've done. Because, Morticia said simply, I've seen what you could be beneath what you've been made to be. The midnight thorn showed it when you touched its petals. The dimensional entity revealed it when your magic transformed from destruction to creation. Even now, the void gems respond to something in you that recognizes a deeper truth than the one you've been taught. She gestured to where the Death Eaters remained nearly frozen, their faces contorted in slow-motion anger and confusion. Is this truly the darkness you wish to serve? One that knows only dominance and fear? Or might there be another way to embrace your nature, one that doesn't require you to diminish yourself to elevate another? Bellatrix felt something crack inside her, a fissure in the certainty that had defined her existence for decades. The past 3 days with the Addams family had shown her glimpses of a different kind of darkness, one that celebrated rather than destroyed, that found power in acceptance rather than control, that understood darkness not as a weapon but as a home. I don't know any other way to be, she admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep and rarely acknowledged. No one does, until they discover it, Morticia replied with gentle understanding. The question is whether you're willing to discover it. The temporal distortion was beginning to weaken. The Death Eater's movements were accelerating, the slow-motion effect gradually diminishing. Time was running out for her decision. Bellatrix looked at the portal, where 2 distinct pathways now shimmered, one leading back to her world, to the Dark Lord, to the life and purpose she had known, the other leading somewhere unknown, unmapped, unexplored. If I choose this other path, she asked, what becomes of me? That, Morticia said with the ghost of a smile, would be entirely up to you. True darkness isn't about following someone else's vision, it's about discovering your own. The Addams family has always understood this. The temporal effect was failing rapidly now. Lucius and the other Death Eaters were nearly back to normal speed, their expressions shifting from confusion to rage as they realized what was happening. The Aurors, too, were recovering, raising their wands once more. Decide now, Morticia urged quietly. Before both choices are taken from you. In that moment, Bellatrix Lestrange, the Dark Lord's most faithful servant, notorious torturer, escaped prisoner, pure-blood fanatic, faced the most unexpected crossroads of her life. Return to the path she had walked for decades, or step into unknown darkness on her own terms. The void gems at her throat pulsed one final time, warm against her skin, as if offering their own silent counsel. She made her choice. As the temporal distortion collapsed completely, chaos erupted once more. The Death Eaters lunged for the time turner, the Aurors cast defensive spells, and the Addams family moved with surprising coordination to create diversion and confusion. In the midst of this chaos, Bellatrix Lestrange stepped toward the portal, but not toward the pathway where Lucius and the others waited. Instead, she moved toward the secondary opening that Itt had created, the one that led neither to the Dark Lord nor to prison. Bellatrix! Lucius shouted, noticing her movement too late. What are you doing? She turned back for one final glance at the scene, the Death Eaters with their silver masks and empty devotion, the Aurors with their rigid righteousness, and the Addams family, standing together with their unique blend of macabre joy and profound understanding. Morticia met her gaze across the chaotic room and nodded once, a gesture of recognition and respect between women who understood darkness in ways others never could. I'm choosing true darkness, Bellatrix replied to Lucius's question, though she doubted he could comprehend her meaning. Not borrowed shadows. With those words, she stepped through the portal, the void gems guiding her along the pathway Itt had created. She felt the familiar sensation of being pulled through dimensions, but this time with a difference, a sense of possibility rather than return, of beginning rather than ending. Behind her, the portal collapsed in a final surge of energy, sealing both pathways and leaving the Death Eaters and Aurors stranded together in the Addams mansion, a predicament that would no doubt prove interesting for all involved, though that was no longer her concern. Bellatrix Lestrange had chosen her own darkness at last. In the Addams mansion, as the dust settled from the portal's collapse, the family gathered around the obsidian circle that now lay dormant once more in the floor. Death Eaters and Aurors stood at opposite sides of the room, one still raised but temporarily at an impasse, united only in their mutual confusion over what had just occurred. "She's gone," Lucius stated flatly. "The Dark Lord will be displeased." "She escaped custody," Proudfoot added, looking equally unhappy. "The ministry won't be thrilled either." "Oh, I wouldn't say she escaped," Morticia observed thoughtfully. "More that she found a different path." "A third option," Wednesday noted with approval. "Statistically improbable but philosophically satisfying." "But where did she go?" Hopkins demanded. "That wasn't the way back to our world." Grandmama shrugged, already turning her attention to cleaning up the magical residue left by the portal. "The multiverse is vast and full of possibilities. She could be anywhere, or anywhen. Time and space get rather flexible at dimensional boundaries." "Don't worry," Gomez assured the bewildered wizards cheerfully. "I'm sure she'll land on her feet. And if not her feet, then whatever other appendage is convenient at the time of arrival." Morticia moved to the obsidian circle, kneeling gracefully beside it to examine its surface. Within the dark glass, a fleeting image appeared, too brief for most to notice, but Morticia saw it clearly: Bellatrix Lestrange, still wearing the void gems, standing at the edge of what appeared to be a vast, star-filled abyss, her expression one of wonder rather than fear. "Farewell, Miss Lestrange," Morticia murmured softly. "May you find what you seek in the darkness." The image faded, leaving only polished obsidian reflecting the candlelight. Morticia smiled, a small, secretive curve of her lips, and rose to address their remaining guests. "Now then," she said pleasantly, "since it appears you gentlemen are temporarily stranded until Grandmama can recalibrate the portal, perhaps we should adjourn to the dining room. Lurch has prepared a midnight feast, and it would be a shame to let it go to waste." As the strange procession moved toward the dining room, Death Eaters and Aurors maintaining wary distance from each other, the Addams family proceeding with their usual macabre cheer, Morticia paused beside the obsidian circle one last time. Within its depths, just for a moment, a star seemed to flare in the darkness, a signal, perhaps, or simply a coincidence of interdimensional light. Either way, Morticia understood its meaning. True darkness had claimed another seeker. And somewhere beyond known dimensions, Bellatrix Lestrange began her journey anew. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.